Marvel. I can control metal. Chapter 81. The situation report of those Iron Warriors also appeared on the electronic projection screen in front of Rod. Tony, all the light spots of the Steel Warriors just disappeared. I'm not sure if Ivan cancelled the positioning or they were wiped out by other forces. It's great, it seems that Leo took the shot. This really solved a big problem. Tony in Mark 6 exclaimed excitedly. Leo. Tony, be careful, I have retargeted to you. Two figures galloping over New York, the M134 heavy machine gun mounted on Rod's armor fired again, and countless bullets formed a bright chain in the air. And the target of the bullet is the Iron Man ahead. Although Tony will not be attacked by this bullet, countless stray bullets have splashed into cars, roads, and buildings. If you are unlucky, there may be many passers-by who will get too. At this moment, in the bustling New York, the place with the fewest people is the spherical natural environment simulation space of the expo not far away is prohibited from entering. Is also the center of the expo. Two silhouettes rushed there, one after the other. Natasha and Happy have also rushed downstairs to Hanmo's company. Natasha unlocked the electronic code lock of the door in 2 or 3 strokes, but Happy walked in first. I can't let you in alone. Then don't turn off the flame. Natasha didn't have time to pay attention to him, and a security guard rushed towards Happy and walked inside first. Harpy raised his fist to greet him, and started a fight with one punch. Facing the ordinary security guard who rushed over, Natasha was very relaxed. Waiting for Happy, exhausted, bruised and biting his ears to defeat the first security guard. When preparing to look at Natasha with a triumphant smile. I saw that there were 8 or 9 security guards who had lost their combat effectiveness and were twisting and rolling on the ground. Both rushed into the office, but apart from the 2 guards who were hung from the roof, there were no other figures. Looking at the screen still on, Natasha put down the double guns in her hands. Went forward and typed out a series of characters that Happy couldn't understand. What are you doing? Reboot Rhodes Warframe. On the other side, Mark 6 has successfully introduced Rod to the field simulation loop mirror. The war machine controlled entirely by Smart Eye could not harm Tony at all. But in the same way, Tony couldn't bear to hurt Rod. He was still suppressed under him, holding the heavy machine gun on Rod's shoulder with both hands, and froze together. Natasha also successfully entered Rhod's battle armor program, shut it down, and connected to Tony's channel at the same time. Rhod, who turned off, was kicked off by Tony. Your buddy is back. After Natasha finished this, she was also relieved and said to Tony relaxedly. Thank you very much, Agent Romanov. Your brand new energy board is great. I found that the output energy is stronger, and your signs of life are also normal. Tony looked at Rod lying in the stream and responded by the way. Yes, I can't die for the time being, thank you. What do you mean? Are you about to die? Pepper, who had contacted the other end first, heard this at the same time. What happened? I was going to tell you. Tony didn't expect Pepper to be in the channel, and said with some horror. You want to tell me? Are you going to die? Why didn't you tell me? I meant to say the last time the omelet. Hey, wait for your honeymoon to talk, an enemy is coming, Tony. Natasha couldn't stand the conversation between the two, looking at the signs on the computer screen. Be careful, this time looks like a big guy, and what about the other Steel Warriors? They shouldn't leave the showroom, Leo is there. Pepper. Are you okay now? Pepper still cared about Tony's body. I'm fine, don't be angry, I formally apologize. I am very angry. Wait until I finish this battle. Okay. We should have been in Venice. Oh, please. Tony closed the channel and made another call. Mr. Stark. Leo was leading Peter to the sphere. Leo, I'm in the simulation environment at the center of the expo. Ivan may come over soon, what about Pepper? It's solved, those little robots, but they were dismantled in 1 minute, and only scum remains. Hearing Leo's words, Tony let out a sigh of relief and shuddered, feeling something wrong. Okay, that's good. Rod and I are here to get to know Ivan and help me take care of Pepper. Do you need help? No, I can do it. Tony said confidently. The firepower equipment on his body has not been consumed much, which gave him great confidence. Leo still walked towards the center unhurriedly, he didn't trust Nee's inexplicable confidence. The ability to lose the whip is very strong, even the double whip is an exclusive weapon made to restrain the mechanical armor. If it's not that the character is too turbulent, in the end, it might be possible to kill Tony and Rod. Tony tapped on the mask of the war machine, banging. Wake up, Rod, I need you. Rod, who was knocked unconscious, finally regained consciousness, opened his mask, and looked at Tony who was staring at him with concern. Oh, brother, you can take the steel armor back. Tony smiled and pulled him up. Tony, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. No, I should trust you more. I killed you, forget it. Tony remembered what happened at the birthday party. Yes, it's your fault, I just want to say sorry, said the Iron Man Rod. Thanks, I just want to hear you say that, buddy. Tony looked at Rod, a big guy is coming, do you have any countermeasures? As soon as the voice fell, a rough steel figure fell from the sky. The dark gray helmet stretched out, revealing a smiling face, and said weirdly, it's nice to be back. Said, spreading his hands, two thick plasma whips quickly stretched out through the wheel behind him. The whip body drew on the ground, and a series of scorched deep scars appeared, and the power was much stronger than the last time. Rod took a step forward, let me use my ex-wife, to blow him up. What is it for? The heavy shoulder armor raised the missile launching nest, and a delicate missile began to eject fireworks. After 2 seconds of energy storage, it escaped and flew out. When Ivan saw the missile, he didn't even close his mask, and pushed it up with his breastplate. Ding! ZZ, puff! Z. The ex-wife fell into the creek water at the foot, as if a dull pie was placed. Tony glanced at Rod silently, Hammer's weapon. Rod didn't want to talk, he just wanted to pull Hammer over and stuff his ex-wife into his mouth. Let me come. Tony's shoulders quickly raised 2 rapid-fire 6-barreled mini-cannons and fired them. And Ivan also buttoned his mask, shook the electromagnetic whip in his hand, and drew it fiercely. Brother Leo, what are we doing here? Isn't the door saying no entry? Peter took Leo's hand, looked at the dark environment and said with some fear. Leo's eyes shone slightly, he looked at the 3 people a few hundred meters in front, and laughed, go, I'll take you to see the excitement. An electromagnetic whip was pulled, so that the 2 of them did not dare to resist, and they separated. Rod set up all the firepower on his body and fired frantically at the whiplash armor. The extremely flexible Ivan drew a whip and directly cut off the 6-barrel of the M134 heavy machine gun. The fracture was scorched black, and Rod was stunned by the powerful power. And Ivan swung a flexible whip to Tony who had just lifted off, but only flew a few meters high and was rolled down. The huge pulling force of the runner directly smashed Mark 6 onto a boulder and smashed it to pieces. A flicker appeared on Tony's virtual panel, which is the effect of the electromagnetic shock flow on the whip on the armor. When Ivan's attention was placed on Rod, the 8 grenade thrusters on Mark 6's right arm rose. 8 small grenades fired at the battle armor waving the whip. The huge force driven by the machine caused a whip to be pulled back, and directly exploded 4 of them, and the 2 grenades shifted their direction. Only 2 nails were nailed to the body of the whiplash. The violent explosion caused a large crack in his plastron, and I also heard a dull sound from Ivan. The speed of dancing the whip was a few minutes faster, and it was directly wrapped around Rod's neck. As Ivan's output tendency, the current was obviously larger. Tony rushed up, trying to knock the whip away. Turned around with a whip and entangled Mark 6 again. At this time, Ivan had already entangled the 2 of them. Rod took advantage of the situation and smashed the whip. But he was also pushed back by a head cone with the whiplash. Tony took the opportunity to break free and fired 2 pulse cannons. Slammed the whiplash, but his hands didn't stop, and the rapid-fire machine gun on his wrist shot Tony. Tony blocked a few shots from the front, a flame burst under his feet, and he flew to the side, constantly spraying pulse cannons in his hands. No machine gun on Rod can cause damage to Ivan, and only the 2-handed pulse cannon can slightly shake the huge whiplash armor. Attracted a little firepower. Tony's shoulder raised a heavy missile and shot it. The mechanical procedure of Lost Whip made him turn sideways in time, but the mere aftermath of the explosion also caused the Lost Whip armor to fall to the ground. Rod pressed up, but was lifted up by the huge mechanical force. Rod, get out of the way. Two metal masks popped out on the backs of Mark 6's hands, and the backs of his hands glowed with red light. Leo led Peter to the infield, only about 100 meters from the center of the fight. Can already hear the obvious sound of fighting, firearms shooting, and fireworks exploding. Peter looked at the movement at the end of the small rock pile, and took Leo's hand with some fear. Brother Leo, let's go back. It looks so dangerous. Aunt May and Aunt Jenny won't let us go to dangerous places. Let's go back. It's okay, there is a brother, absolutely no one hurts you. Leo said confidently. Don't. Little Peter looked at the scene there, took Leo's hand hard, and retreated hard. Was very stubborn and walked backwards. Although he didn't pull Leo, he also dragged a few dirt marks under his feet. Looking at Peter, who was unwilling to step forward, Leo had to give up the idea. Looked towards the battle center. The battle situation has become anxious. The double whips of the whip scorched Rod and Tony's battle clothes with scorching scars. At the same time, Mark 6 a final skill, the laser beam is already accumulating energy, and the direction is exactly where Leo is. The space between is nothing but a small stone model. Leo stepped forward, blocking Peter's front, and a golden light of protective body lit up in front of him. Tony's hands were aimed at the whiplash armor, and two incomparable red lasers shot over. Before Ivan could react, the laser directly penetrated the cracked metal plastron, came out through the back, and pierced the simulated stone behind him. The two lasers rushed towards Leo, condensed on the immovable golden light shield in front of Leo, stirring up waves. 2 seconds later, the laser disappeared, and a large hole was burned in Ivan's abdomen. Part of the internal organs had been damaged, and he lay down weakly. The golden light in front of Leo also slowly dissipated, watching the laser carrier device pop up in Mark 6 a hand, and he was puzzled. The energy level is much lower than I thought, and it is impossible to break through my defenses. Single quote. Ivan's whiplash armor, the mask opened, revealing an expression of incomparable pain, watching Tony walking in front of him. There is an accident, otherwise, you will lose. I won't lose. The reactor in front of Ivan's chest lit up with red flashing lights, the frequency getting faster and faster. The two of them instantly judged that it was a tendency to explode. Tony thought about it. He was not sure whether all the robots in the venue had been resolved, and whether Pepper was safe. But before he could make the next move, the reactor on Ivan's chest flew automatically, divided into 18 pieces and fell to the ground. Leo also walked back holding Peter's hand, looked at the fireworks in the sky off the court, and smiled. The fireworks are still good looking, so don't make any explosions. The sound is not good, but this time it went smoothly. There was no major damage. Everyone can live a good year with peace of mind, right? Brother Leo, let's go back to watch TV, the fireworks are not good at all. Peter pulled Leo, who was watching the fireworks, and said. Sure, go home and watch TV. Rod stared at Ivan, who was dead, and the debris of the reactor on the ground. Black question mark, send. What happened? Tony looked around and didn't see any figures, but he guessed something. Both hands and feet spouted flames and rushed out. Rod, don't forget the military press conference. Iwan's body, I will send someone to deal with it. I will go back to Pepper. Rod glanced at his damaged armor, as well as the cars, buildings, and possibly pedestrians he was flying along and shooting along the way. The mask is also buttoned up. What's going on? I'm just here to participate in an exhibition, shit. The next day, Tony got a secret message and was called to a red brick factory. At the same time, a call was made to Leo's cell phone. Was also invited over. Leo turned into a stream of light and went directly to the roof of the brick house. He easily opened a hole and flew in without being noticed by the shield guards guarding outside. Only Nick Fury was sitting in front of the computer, looking at the files in his hands. Glanced at Leo, who fell from the sky. He didn't seem to be surprised. Sit down, you can wait for Tony to come. Single quote. Why, are you still going to invite Tony Stark into the Avengers? Don't you know? Nick Fury glanced at Leo flatly. I suspected that I found Roger's trail recently. He may be found soon. Do you have any good opinions? He is still alive, but he is not much better than dead. Give him some responsibility, so that he will be more comfortable. Isn't this the best person for your Avengers? As for how to comfort him, I think you should be ready. Leo saw a map of the world on the electronic screen on the side, with several key positions marked on it. At the same time, the sound of a sports car's motor came over, stopped at the door, and Tony came. Leo, you are here too, and Nick Fury also wants you to join his Superboy team. Tony closed the door, walked over generously, and sat down on the table. I saw the documents on the table at first sight and got it in my hand. Preliminary report of the Avengers. Just about to open it, but Nick Fury reached out and pressed it down. I don't want you to read that newspaper, I'm not sure it has anything to do with you. Then Nick picked up another report. As for this report, it is an assessment by Agent Romanov, and you can see for yourself. Tony took it suspiciously, opened it and looked at it. Character analysis, Stark often acts impulsively. Tony turned his head and stared at Nick, that was just last week. Tendency to self-destruct. I was dying at the time, okay. Tony couldn't help retorting. Please, aren't we all like this? A typical narcissist. Tony froze for a while, then turned to look at Nick. I agree. Avengers recruitment evaluation, Iron Man. Yes. Tony sneered, and said to Nick who was staring at him motionlessly, I have to think about it. Keep reading. Tony Stark, no. Not recommended. Tony looked at Nick Fury suspiciously. How can you accept me and deny me again? I have a brand new heart, and I plan to treat Pepper well. Our relationship is very stable. Nick Fury walked to Tony's side and looked at him. Because of this, what makes us believe is that you can only serve as a consultant for now. Tony frowned slightly, put the report in his hand on the table, got up and laughed, and stretched out his right hand to Nick. You can't afford me. Turned and left, but Nick Fury sat on the table steadily and looked at Tony with a confident look. Sure enough, Tony just walked a few steps before turning around and said. But I am willing to use my contract fee, please do me a small favor. Leo turned from the map and walked over. Nick Fury, what's in this place? Pointed to the only one in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean among the 7 points on the map. Nick came over with a black face and looked at Leo calmly. Do you know any other places? Leo advisor. Leo, have you joined this Avengers? Leo looked at these two people speechlessly. Tony can also recognize a few places. Stark also noticed this map, looking at a spot on the far left. Isn't this my home? You even highlighted it. Next to New Mexico, where Collison should go, there is also a spot in New York. Is it because of Hulk? The rest are Greenland, Tensberg in Norway, Wakanda in Africa, and here. Mysterious Atlantic Island, what happened here? Leo looked at the key points on the map and said. Nick Fury showed a slight smile and gave Leo a deep look. Leo returned home and received a strange package the next day. Can be seen as a small black box, and it is a technological product. Open it, and there is a note that Tony left him. Open it. Put it on the ground and press the switch on the side. A blue scanning beam appeared in the garage to survey the surroundings. Within a few seconds, Tony Stark's holographic projection appeared in front of Leo. And Tony seems to be able to see Leo's appearance. Hey, Leo, how about it? My new information base station, my own equipment, cannot monitor real-time dynamics. See, you have something to do yesterday, what's wrong? Tony walked to the workbench and got busy, and the projection position moved in real time. It's okay, Mr. Stark, what are your plans next? Tony was taken aback, turned his chair and looked at Leo. I will redefine the development direction of Stark Industry, and I will use new elements to create new clean energy. The new energy industry will become the new pillar of Stark, and if the reactor is not spread, I can continue to be my Iron Man. How about you? Of course I continue to go to school, but I plan to go to New Mexico first. Did something happen there? Shield marked it out. A foreigner, but it's a small question. Mr. Stark, does Mark 7 have an idea? Of course, it is still the problem of portability and fast equipment. My idea is to realize remote summoning and dress quickly. But it's still in the consideration stage. You know, I have been very busy recently. Pepper can't stand the position of CEO at all. I've been busy working on new energy matters, so Mark 7 will be born later. Tony was sitting in the studio typing on the keyboard. Suddenly, as if he heard something, he stood up. Pepper is back. Leo, next time you talk, remember to call me if you have anything to do. I believe you. In the end, Tony said seriously to Leo, and the projection turned off. Leo looked at the small black box on the ground and laughed inexplicably. The box flew into his hand automatically, and put it on the workbench. Leo, come out to eat, Peter has come to play with you. Coming. At noon the next day, Leo, who had eaten lunch, told Aunt Jenny to go out for a stroll. She carried her little school bag, which contained a new reactor and a Nordic mythology. I bought it in the children's area of the library yesterday, and I finished reading it in one night. It was extremely disgusting. Apart from the fact that the characters may look the same, the story is really poor. Took his small mobile phone and rushed into the clouds as a golden light away from 10 streets. Flew to New Mexico. In just 10 or 20 minutes, I came to this desolate Gobi Desert. Turned off the map of the phone, found the only small town I could see here, and walked in with a small school bag on his back. This small town is not too big in total, and Leo guessed that this should be the town where Thor and Jane were, and the town where the final battle took place. Glanced around his eyes, as if he didn't see any corresponding images. I don't know what time it is now, is Thor in the hospital now? Single quote. Looking at the anti-monitoring satellite phone that Tony gave him in his hand, there is no Collison phone in it. Forget it, I just picked a corner restaurant that was pleasing to the eye and walked in. Although I just finished my lunch, I finally made a trip to New Mexico. How can I not eat some local specialties? Went in and ordered some of the most famous meals, and sat at the table to eat. And Leo just finished his last bite of the cake when he saw a group of people approaching here. A beautiful woman with curly hair and black frame wearing glasses, followed by a brawny blonde man who is 1.9 meters tall, a beautiful blonde woman and a middle-aged man who is about to bald. The four of them walked in together. The brawny blonde man looked very strange to his surroundings, while the middle-aged man often looked at him suspiciously. The glasses girl took the lead to the front desk and called out, here are 2 boxes of sandwich pastries, 2 cakes, and 4 cups of classic milk tea. Leo looked at the group and laughed. Yes, it was Thor and Jane, as well as Dr. Eric and their assistant Daisy. The rest of the people are all looking at it. The weird man who fell from the sky the other night and ran out of the hospital last night, Thor. Including Leo, who was sitting on the side, kept looking at this man called Thor, even though he was still just a hammer god. Daisy sat back. She came out for an internship in her senior year. She is more concerned about eating, drinking and having fun. Thor, try this sandwich pastry, it tastes great, and this milk tea, a classic here. Leo also took the milk tea in his hand and walked over. Hey, hello everyone, can I sit here? Took the opportunity to sit at the table and filled the last empty seat. The four of them looked like they were only children, but they did not refuse. Hey, a kid, we stayed in Old Bridge Town for 2 months and haven't seen you, where are you from? Daisy saw Leo, sat over with interest, looked at Leo and asked. I came from New York. I came here only today. I heard that a satellite fell near here. Have you heard of it? Leo looked at everyone and said. Eric and the 3 looked at each other, is it Thor? Single quote. Thor didn't really care at first. He would be hungry even if he was immortal, eating the cake in front of him. Child, what's your name? Daisy looked at Leo and asked. My name is Leo. This old gentleman is a bit familiar. I seem to have read your news on the internet. Dr. Eric Selvig, Doctor of Astronomy, right? Leo smiled at Daisy, looked at Dr. Eric and said with a smile. I was deeply impressed by him because Dr. Eric was the scientist who was finally bewitched by Rocky and opened the huge portal above New York. Eric didn't expect that the kid could tell his identity, and he smiled and replied, yes, it seems that you usually like astronomy. Yes, I have been following Rosenbridge theory for some time, and I have always believed in its existence. Jane smiled and glanced at Daisy. You know the Einstein-Rosenbridge theory when you see a child, you don't even know. I know, although I only learned about it this morning, I majored in political science. Daisy took a sip of milk tea and seemed a little depressed. But do you know? I was reading Norse mythology recently. Don't you think that Rosenbridge theory is similar to the Rainbow Bridge in the book? Leo took out a cartoon version of Norse mythology from his school bag and turned to the page of Rainbow Bridge. Eric's brow furrowed tighter, and he seemed to think Leo was joking with science. Thor also took a look here. He had just become a mortal with the pride of God, and he was a little disdainful to explain these things to them, except for Jane. Jane glanced at the book, or cast her gaze on Thor. How did you get into that mist? Daisy looked at Thor, who had been munching on. Also, why are you so hungry after eating a whole box of sandwich pastries? The 4 pastries prepared in front of him are almost finished by Thor alone. Daisy took out a few pieces and put them in front of Leo. Thor finished the cake in front of him, drank the last sip of milk tea, looked at the cup in his hand and exclaimed, I like this drink. I know, great, right? Daisy said with a smile, these are her favorites. Thor yelled, one more cup. Casually threw the cup in his hand to the ground. A small hand grabbed the cup that was about to fall to the ground and smashed it into a smash, and put it on the table safely. The rules here are not like that. If you like to drink, just say it. It's not a good habit to smash a cup. Leo looked at Thor, who was sitting comfortably. Thor, what are you doing? Jane came back to her senses and said loudly to Thor. Daisy looked at the intact cup on the table, then glanced at Leo. It seemed that the child was more mysterious than Thor. Eric also put his gaze on Leo's body. Just now everyone did not react, and Leo grabbed the cup directly, which was an incredible move. Thor looked at the angry Jane and said with a smile, it tastes good, I want to have another drink, I have no intention of offending. Okay. Then don't throw anything, okay? I promise you that. Thor stared at Jane intently and said affectionately. Thor was so fascinated by the beautiful women he saw for the first time in the lower realm. Looking at Jane a little shy, Daisy smiled and looked at Jane. And Leo's eyes were glowing with golden light, looking at Thor, layer by layer penetrated in. He wanted to see what is the difference between God and man. Whether it is muscle strength or bone density, it is indeed far superior to ordinary people, which proves that even Thor, who is exiled by the ****** king, is a person of superior physical quality. But Leo didn't see anything about thunder and lightning, as if he was really just the body of a strong man. Looked up to Thor's brain, but saw a faint electric light enveloped his brain penetrated in. You can see a small ball of thunder light curled up inside, countless flashes of electric light circulates in the small ball, but there is no trace of power coming out, as if blocked by a layer of energy. When Leo tried to pass through that protective cover, he couldn't do it. The golden light in his eyes is a little bit worse, but it is still unable to penetrate. Under the microscopic view, it seems that there are countless patterns carved on it. Although you can see it clearly, you don't understand the meaning. Daisy saw the golden light in Leo's eyes and shook her hand in front of him. Leo, how are you? Leo blinked, the golden light disappeared, and laughed. Sister Daisy, I'm fine. At this time, there was a discussion voice from the side. They said a satellite fell in the desert. Yes, where we were playing, and the FBI people came. Jane glanced at Leo strangely, then turned around and asked, excuse me, did a satellite fall? Correct. What does that satellite look like? Dr. Eric asked. I don't understand this, but it is heavy, I mean, no one can handle it. Tony heard this, put down the knife and fork in his hand and walked over, grabbing the shoulders of passers-by. How to get there? Leo also stood up. 50 miles west from here. Thor listened, turned his head and left, ready to find his beloved hammer. Don't bother. When we left, it seemed that the whole army was here. Passers-by said to him, and Thor ignored it. The other people also chased up, including Leo, and they were going to check it out first. Mjolnir. Jane chased out. Where are you going? It's 50 miles west here. Why? Go get back what belongs to me. Do you own a satellite? Thor didn't stop. It's not what they said. Whatever it is, the government seems to think it belongs to them. Are you going to just walk over and take it? Jane asked suspiciously. Yes. Thor turned around and looked at Jane with a smile on his face. If you drive me there now, I will tell you everything you want to know. Everything. Wait for me to get back the hammer of Thor, Mjolnir, you will get the answer you want. Daisy and Dr. Eric came up. Meow. What is meow? Eric frowned and saw Jane, who seemed to have been attracted by the tall and handsome Thor, and pulled her aside. Don't do this. Jane retorted, you saw it yesterday. It's not a coincidence. We have to know what is in the crater. I'm not talking about the crater, but about him. He glanced at Thor. Jane said excitedly, but he promised to give us the answer. He has delusion. Listen to what he said. What Thor's hammer, Thor, in Rainbow Bridge. This is a story I heard when I was young. I just drove him over, nothing more. Jane retorted with a smile still. He is dangerous, Jane. Eric stared at Jane, really didn't want his most proud disciple to know this weird man with delusion. Looking at Eric, who is so determined, Jane also struggled. Although he has a good impression of Thor, Eric is really good to him. Leo walked up to Thor. Thor, how many people do you think you can defeat with your current physique? You have been defeated in the hospital. Do you think you have a chance to get close to Mjolnir? I'm Thor. As long as I get close to my Mjolnir, I can regain my power. No one in Midgard can beat me. Thor also knows his current situation, but he still has infinite confidence in himself. He is Thor, the son of Odin. Looking at Thor, who was still so arrogant, Leo laughed. Stood in front of him, looking at Thor, who was dozens of centimeters taller than himself. Compare my strength with me. If you win, I will take you to the place where the Meow Hammer fell, and no one will stop you. Thor looked at the little bit in front of him, and smiled mockingly, even Hercules can't beat me. You, a mortal kid, want to try my strength. Jane came over at this time. I'm sorry, I can't take you there. Thor looked at Jane with a confident smile, then separate. Took Jane's right hand and kissed the back of her hand lightly, looking at Jane, who was excited and shy, and Dr. Eric, who was frowning, and Daisy, who was watching the excitement. See you again. Eric took the two girls, who were a little bit dissatisfied with Thor. Let's go back to work. And Leo looked at Thor and rolled up his sleeves. There is no horse here for you to ride. If you want to try it, I can take you there. Thor looked at Leo and said with a smile, although you are only a child, I can also let you try the taste of failure. The two of them looked for a stone table on the side of the street, and held the large and the small hands together. Thor didn't seem to have considered the issue of failure. After all, he had won for hundreds of years and hadn't lost. Used his right hand slightly, but didn't shake Leo's white arm, as if holding a hard metal rod, unable to twist it. Looking at Leo, who was calm and relaxed, he couldn't help but increase his strength. The strength value reached 22 Leo, which has surpassed the limit of the human body, and it can even be said that it has exceeded the physical fitness of Captain America. Is not the power that Thor, who has been sealed with power, can shake. In the end, even if Thor tried his best, he did not bend Leo's little hand. Instead, Leo added a bit of strength and pressed Thor's big hand on the stone table. Thor let go of his hand weakly, annoyed in his heart. He lost his supernatural power, otherwise, how could he lose to a mortal child? His eyes were a little dull. This was because he had lost again for hundreds of years, except after rushing to Jotunheim a few days ago, because the ice giant ran away too much. But he was not discouraged, because in Thor's mind, he only lost his divine power to become so weak. As long as he gets back Mjolnir, he is still the #1 warrior of the 9 realms, Odin's son, Thor. Leo felt his power, and it didn't exceed 20 points. In other words, even Captain America's power surpassed Thor at this time. Clicked Thor's shoulder. Let's go, they should come to us later, Jane. Thor also stood up. Why? Because Coulson is here. Who is Coulson? Who is Cole? Leo looked at Thor, who had lived for 1,500 years and was still so nervous, and said, "Shi." Leo walked in the direction where Dr. Eric had left, and Thor followed. He doesn't think Leo is just an ordinary kid. To those who have defeated him, Thor always has a trace of respect in his heart, and he doesn't have the idea of running 50 miles on his own. When the three of Jane returned to their house, they found that there were more than a dozen people in black carrying all the scientific research equipment, materials, and equipment in their cars in their rooms. Jane rushed up, stopped one of them, and shouted, "You can't do this." Ericla, who found that something was wrong, stopped Jane and whispered, "Jane, this is more serious than you think, let them go. Let them go. These are my life," Jane said angrily. Coulson walked up, as the commander-in-chief of this incident, said to Jane, who was furious. "We are investigating a security threat and need to call your records and atmospheric observation data. Call. You are stealing." Coulson took out a check and handed it to Jane. "This should compensate you for the trouble." You can't buy replacement equipment in digital stores. I make many of them myself. Jane rushed to the trunk of the car to grab a black notebook and said angrily. I am sure you can make new ones. I am also sure that I can sue you for infringement of personal interests. Collison looked at Jane. I'm sorry, Miss Foster, but we are good people. Seeing that Jian was arguing with the man in black, Dr. Eric took Jane and calmed him down, unable to fight with these people. Collison took away everything and said to the three with a smile, thank you for your cooperation. The three of them had no choice but to watch Coulson and the others leave. In the empty scientific research room, all the equipment, materials, and equipment were taken away. The three of them sat on the platform on the second floor, looking at the sunset, a little at a loss. Drive Eric, are you okay? Leo came downstairs and looked at the three people above calling. Daisy, who was a little sad because the iPad was taken away, saw the two people below and exclaimed in excitement. Look, it's Leo and Thor. But Daisy looked down at the other two who were sad, and then lowered her head. Well, it's useless if they come. Leo walked up first, just in time to hear Dr. Eric talking. I know a scientist, a pioneer in the study of gamma radiation. After S.H.I.E.L.D. found him, I never heard from him again. Is it Dr. Bruce Banner? I've seen him before, I think I have seen him. Leo came over from behind and sat beside Dr. Eric. It seems that your condition is not good. Daisy looked at Leo and said, yes, a guy named Collison took all of our things, and my iPad, and inside it was the 30 I just downloaded. Could you not tell me about your iPad? Jane glanced at Daisy. She was very angry at S.H.I.E.L.D.'s behavior. They can't do this to us, I want to get everything back. If it's Coulson, I think I can help a little. Leo said. Tor stood behind a few people and said loudly. Can we go find my Mjolnir? If I get my hammer back, I can also help you get your things back. Asgard. Because of Odin's deep sleep, Loki took the gun of eternity, Gungnir, and sat on the throne he dreamed of. At the same time, together with Thor impulsively go to the other people in Jotunheim. The three warriors of the Immortal Palace and Sifu came over. The four of them hoped to see Odin, the father of the gods, to end Thor's exile. But I didn't expect that it was Rocky sitting on the throne. Where is Odin? The father has entered Odin's sleep, and my mother is worried that he will not be able to wake up again, and is unwilling to leave his father's side. Rocky's voice was a little choked, as if he was sad for Odin's deep sleep. Seeing the four people coming, Lujan got up. You can tell me what is urgent. Loki, wearing a golden antler helmet, green cloak, and holding the eternal spear. S expression also changed from sadness to arrogance. Your king. Sif and the three warriors from the Immortal Palace looked at Loki above and hesitated for a while, because they were still worried about Thor's danger. Kneeling on one knee, making a fist with his right hand on his left chest, and saying, Your Majesty, we ask you to end Thor's exile. Rocky chuckled and walked down slowly. Our war with Jotunheim is about to break out. Our people need the continuation of the kingdom's policies so that we can feel safe in difficult times. We must all unite and guard Asgard. Hearing this official scene, Sif stood up abruptly, but was pulled by Hogun, one of the three warriors. The calmer Hogun said to Rocky, Yes, that's right. Very good, then wait for my order. Luo base station looked at the four people underneath on the steps and said. Vostag said, If I take the liberty, please be generous and reconsider. No need to say more. Rocky roared softly. The three people left angrily. Shiv stared at Loki for a while, and then left angrily. It was Loki's bewitching. On the day of Thor's crown, he took them to attack Jotunheim. Thor, who was supposed to be the king, was banished to the earth. Now, Loki has the power to end the exile, but he doesn't do it, which really disgusts Sif and several others. Loki looked at the few people who had left, and sat back on the throne. Is this Loki's plan? The three ice giants at the time of the coronation were indeed brought in by him. But only because I think Thor is arrogant, reckless, and dangerous, and he is not yet suitable for being a king. Finally, he poked and urged Thor. I just want Thor to go with Odin and go head on, so that Thor has a worse impression in Odin's heart. Who knows that Thor, who is very nervous, is directly preparing to attack Jotunheim. There are only 6 of them. Before Rocky left, he made a small report and left a trick, and finally saved the little friends and them, while leaving Thor with a dark history. However, when evacuating from the battlefield, it was Rocky who was left at the end and still shouting Thor. When Thor was banished, it was Rocky who ran to the portal with tears in his eyes. His goal was not such a serious consequence. But seeing Odin throw the Meow hammer down, Loki instantly understood everything. It was said that he would fight for the throne as equals, but Thor was directly appointed by himself. Especially when he knew that he was not Odin's biological son. Is the king of frost giants in Jotunheim. After Laufey's son, his determination to become king is even more eager. Roared and confronted Odin, shouted, "I am not your son. You are not my father." But while Odin was sleeping, Loki, who knew his identity, was still worried and hurriedly called the guards. Loki was taught that the ice giant is a ***** since he was a child, but he was the son of the king of ice giants. Being sensitive and suspicious by nature, he suspects that Odin has another purpose in adopting him. But the admiration and love for his father tortured him again. Luo is proud of his genetic identity, and feels inferior because of his blood. Therefore, his plan now is to let Lao Fei come in to assassinate Odin, and then take the opportunity to kill Lao Fei by eternal shot. Then pass the powerful energy of the Rainbow Bridge to destroy the entire Jotunheim. Rocky just wanted to get his father's approval. Dr. Eric stood up and looked at Leo in shock. "You know Banner. Do you still know someone from S.H.I.E.L.D.? Collison." Leo looked at the people around him and nodded. "It's an acquaintance, I should be able to say a few words, so I think it should not be difficult to get your things back." "Great, then let's go quickly." Jane couldn't wait to say, now she most wants to retrieve her beloved information. Daisy also said happily. "Yeah, it's great, my Ipa, the data can also be retrieved, so lucky to know Leo." Looked at Jane's eyes and changed her words quickly. Tor was a little confused. "Who is Cole? You have to look for his son. I just want my Mjolnir." 5 people got on the jeep and drove 50 miles west. Tor, who is the largest, is of course the co-driver, and Jane is driving. Leo, Daisy, and Eric are sitting in the back row. Along the way, probably because of Leo's existence, the atmosphere has been relaxed a lot. Dr. Eric wants to talk to Leo about Dr. Banner. Jane also chatted with Thor. Quote. "They stole the results of my life's research, and I have nothing to lose." Jane drove the car and said. "Yes, but you are smart, much smarter than the others in this kingdom." Thor said. "The kingdom? Who are you? Seriously. You will know soon." Thor smiled. He seemed to want to see what Jane would look like when he knew he was a god. "You promised to tell me the answer." Thor turned his head and said to Jane, "What you are looking for is a bridge. For example, the Einstein-Rosen bridge. It's more like a rainbow bridge." Jane was taken aback, glanced at Leo in the back seat, and then at Thor. Shook his head slightly. "God, I hope you are not crazy. I know who Thor is." Leo's voice attracted the eyes of several people. Thor was a little disdainful, thinking that on Earth, no one knew his true identity. Because he hasn't come to the Earth for many years, now the Earth only has their legends. Leo glanced at Dr. Eric. "Drive Eric, I think you already have some guesses." "It's just a guess, I still don't want to believe it." Eric said. "It's a pity, I know some subversion of your worldview, but it's true." Leo took out the Norse mythology in his school bag. Tor Odinson, Thor's hammer, the owner of Mjolnir. Jane stopped the accelerator, turned to look at Leo, and Thor on the side. "Are you joking collectively? Jane, you witnessed Thor's arrival with your own eyes at the time. I'm afraid you already have some doubts in your heart." Leo handed over the book in his hand, just turning to the page of Thor. Wore a red cloak, silver armor, and a silver helmet with small wings. Blonde hair, beard, eyebrows, really similar to Thor. Jane started driving again. "I never believed such unrealistic claims before seeing the truth." Thor, who has been rough and nervous, also reacted a little at this time, looking at Leo, frowning. "How did he determine my identity?" Single quote. "When a few people drove to this place, the sky was already dark. There was nothing in the wilderness. In less than a day, a small base was built out of thin air. 5 huge incandescent lamps shone in the sky, and a small research center was built with the Meow hammer as the center. Is surrounded by a white cloth film. Several connected passages have been constructed, Fixed routes and stricter screening of personnel have been carried out so that it can be better fortified. All the surroundings were fenced with barbed wire. At the same time, there were several cars and dozens of junior agents who were on patrols. A few people turned off the lights, parked the car to the other side of the hill, and walked up quietly, seeing the scene at hand. This is not a satellite impact at all. They should have carried the wreck away instead of building a city around it. Jian saw this situation and couldn't help but say. Tor seemed to feel something. With an excited smile on his face, he said to Jane. You stay here, and once you get Meinl, I will return what they stole to you. No, look there, do you think you can walk in swaggeringly, pick up our things, and walk out? No, I will fly out. Thor finished speaking, and ignoring the eyes of the others, he walked out directly. Daisy patted Leo on the shoulder. Leo, don't you go out. Don't you know that Collison? Don't worry, I want to see how Thor wants to solve this problem. Leo watched with interest the scene where Thor rushed down. As Thor approached, Mjolnir seemed to have a sense and began to release his own energy. At the same moment, several thunder lights appeared in the sky, and it seemed that there was a tendency to rain. Mjolnir's energy interference caused all the surrounding electronic devices to flicker, and even satellites could not monitor it. Tor even broke the barbed wire directly and rushed in. Of course, this behavior was discovered. Several agents rushed over and arrested Thor. And Thor now only wants to get his love hammer, no one can stop him. Rich combat experience, coupled with a physical fitness that surpasses ordinary people, allowed Thor to successfully defeat several agents. Looking at the lightning and thundering night sky, Thor felt extra cordial and laughed and rushed into the White Passage. Jane watched this scene very anxiously, and took Leo with her right hand. Leo, don't you go in and ask an acquaintance for help. It's okay, Jane, don't worry. Leo's eyes gleamed slightly, his gaze locked directly on the hammer in the center. The square sledgehammer was placed obliquely on that layer of soil. Although other people could not see it, Leo could clearly observe it. On both sides of the Meow hammer, there are 3 colored seals composed of ellipses, hidden in the hammer. It will decide whether the person lifting the hammer is qualified to obtain the power of Thor. And this seal is the last order issued by Odin, the father of the gods. Whoever holds this hammer in his hand and deserves it, will have the power of Thor. Single quote. Leo glanced at the sky, he knew that Odin was sleeping. So also went out and said to the other 3 people, by the way, you should go back to the car and get out of the rain. I will bring Thor and the information back. The originally dark night sky began to rain lightly, and it was slowly increasing. Leo disappeared into the dark night before he took a few steps. At this time, in the camp, the arrival of Thor has caused quite a stir. Collison also knew the source of the riot. An unknown man knocked down a dozen agents and broke in. Raised the intercom in his hand. I need high-altitude support, with a gun. In a carriage outside the passage, countless guns were hung on the walls of the carriage. A figure lying down received the message, and there happened to be a high-precision sniper beside him. Quickly sat up, reached out and took a cup of black compound bow from the wall, turned over and jumped out of the car. Ran directly to a small platform and was pulled into the air. A pair of sharp eyes appeared above the base, looking for the source of the chaos. Leo came to the bottom of the suspended platform, glanced up, and smiled. Hawkeye, button. Single quote. Said, sprinting lightly, breaking through the barbed wire, and stepping into the passage. Clint conditioned a glance at the bottom, a little puzzled, has anyone entered just now? Single quote. Collison. It seemed that someone broke in again just now, but I'm not sure, I didn't see it clearly. What? You didn't see it clearly? Collison put down the intercom in his hand and walked over. The computer flickered, and the bald Sidwell said to Coulson. That thing sent out a strong electromagnetic oscillation, and the system could not bear it. Barton. Report the status quo. The rain was getting heavier and heavier. Thor got up from the ground covered in mud, and had just taken care of the last big agent. But Patton on the high platform was already full of bowstrings, and steadily aimed at Thor. No matter how heavy the rain was, his hands did not tremble at all, and he pointed straight at Thor. Do you want me to kill him? Or send more people to catch him alive? Wait for my order. Thor tore open the last layer of plastic film that was blocking, and looked at Mjolnir, who was firmly placed in the center, with a very happy smile on his face. Strode forward, staring at the hammer in front of him, full of excitement. Coulson also came to the second floor at this time, looking at Thor, who was standing in the rain. Button's right hand pulled back a few more points. Last chance, sir. Wait, I want to see how to do it. Collison stared at the figure in the middle and said, he also stopped the other reinforcements, wanting to see what Thor wanted to do. A small figure suddenly appeared beside Coulson, looking at Thor together. Collison, can you guess he can pick it up? What's the situation? Leo, why are you here? This matter is serious, I think I need to come over and take a look. Collison looked at Leo's gaze. Do you know who this man is? Well, do you know what this hammer is? Collison looked at the hammer in the center with some silence. My guess has been told to Fury, and he asked me to solve it, and it seems that there are other discoveries on Greenland. Thor excitedly shook his hand on the handle of the hammer and lifted it forcefully. The hammer didn't move, but stood there firmly, as if connected to the earth. Thor felt something was wrong, and continued to pull up hard, even putting his hands together. Pull up with all my strength. Above the sky, the thunder was still flashing, and the raindrops fell, soaking Thor's whole body. Just after tumbling in the mud with an agent, now his hair is still dripping, and his body is covered with mud. But Thor doesn't care about all of this, he just wants to raise his hammer, Mjolnir. The thunder and lightning in the sky kept flashing, and Thor held it with all his strength, and veins appeared on the two sturdy arms. But there was a stalemate, but the hammer did not move at all. Thor loosened weakly, took 2 steps back, looked at his hands in a panic, and couldn't believe this scene. Looked up at the rain and looked at the thunder and lightning sky. Let out a desperate roar. The tragic and majestic voice can be heard clearly by Jane, who is hundreds of meters away. Jane thought something was wrong with Thor, and she covered her mouth in fear. Daisy hugged Jane and patted her. It's okay, if the two of them don't come out in another hour, we will go in and look for them. Thor weakly bowed his head before the hammer. This behavior is a painful blow to him. Coulson also raised the intercom. Well, the performance is over, the ground troops enter. 7 or 8 spies armed with guns stepped up and smacked Thor, who had no intention of resisting. Standing on a high place, Button also released the bowstring in his hand, staring straight at the strange figure beside Coulson. Leo, wearing a mask, looked back, and waved his hand friendly towards Patton, who was hidden in the sky in the dark rainy night. Collison looked at Thor, who was taken away, and turned to look at Leo on the side. Why are you wearing a mask? This is all from S.H.I.E.L.D. That's not necessarily. Leo looked at some familiar people around him. Especially the bald head on the side, Sidwell, a senior member of Hydra, one of the key figures in the Insight project. Although Collison didn't know who Leo was tabooing, he still took Leo to an empty room. Why did you come to Mexico? Also, I read Norse mythology, so this hammer really is. Collison asked Leo. You have seen aliens, so don't make a fuss. That hammer is indeed the weapon in the myth, Thor's hammer. So, Thor, Odin or something, also exist. Although Collison had seen the Kree stars before, he was still a little confused when he heard this. The characters in these mythological stories actually existed. But he quickly adjusted his mentality. Why did Thor's hammer land on the Earth? This is a signal that aliens are invading the Earth. No, of course not, it's just that Odin exiled Thor to the Earth, and there is no intention to invade. Collison listened to Leo and thought about it. Leo himself was a little strange. Agent Coulson, we don't seem to know very well, you seem to believe me very much. Coulson glanced around. Director Fury told me that you can be trusted, and your words have a high degree of credibility, and your identity is kept confidential. Did he tell many people about me? Leo frowned. No, just tell me for the time being, because I have seen you. By the way, this is my personal phone number. If you have any questions, you can contact me. Collison also handed over a business card, and Leo put it away. It seems that a lot of strange things have happened recently, and my mind is a little confused. Collison exhaled. Then you have to get used to it quickly, and you may play bigger in the future. Leo also sighed somewhat. By the way, can Dr. Eric and their equipment materials be returned to them? The things they research are not of great value. I think someone will know it better, so you can return them after copying the materials. Collison thought for a while. Yes, but who is the man outside? He made me look like the cheapest mall security guards with strict training. Thor, but he's just a mortal now. Hearing these words, Collison's mouth twitched. Thor. It seems we can start with him to understand their habits and purpose. The power of God's domain, shield. Bureau cannot provoke for the time being. Thor, there is a chance to become a member of the Avengers. Collison looked at the boy in front of him, and remembered the words Fairy had quietly said to him. Okay, take a look at it for now, but don't let him leave the 100-mile radius around Old Bridge Town before his identity is determined. Collison said, do you need me to let him go? Wait a while, I'm waiting for someone, you can talk to him first. The two went out together. Coulson left first and went to Thor's interrogation room, ready to follow the normal process to communicate with Thor. And Leo wore the pass Coulson had just given him, and came next to Meow Hammer. Looking at this extremely heavy Mjolnir in front of him, Leo smiled slightly. He can sense the existence of Ulu metal. Ulu is produced in Nidvile, the land of dwarves in one of the 9 realms. The metal feature is that it can store a lot of energy, especially magic energy. When Ulu is given magic, it will become more durable and can even be automatically repaired after damage. But Ulu is also a highly unforgeable metal, needs to use extreme methods to forge it, such as using the core of a star to forge or use magic to forge it. Leo, who has reached 113 points of control, can roughly feel the hammer in front of him. Can even feel the huge energy of the part of the rainbow tree that is sealed. Leo reached out and shook the handle of the hammer, but like everyone who tried before, Mjolnir didn't move. Let go of his right hand, and his little hand pressed against the hammer head. Following the movement of Leo's hand, Meow Hammer started to tremble, and the lightning in the sky became even worse. Leo put his hand on the hammer handle again. Can pick up the hammer along the way, but it is not the physical power used, and it has not been approved by Mjolnir. Is purely a seal with a hammer, and it is controlled together with the body. In Leo's concept, this is just a big metal hammer, but the metal is of very high quality. But it is only the overall control. Leo tried to change the shape of the hammer, but he was unable to do so. So calmly put it back to the original position, glanced at the sky, and just now a peeping force was watching him. The guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, Heimdall, the observer of the 9 realms, saw him. Flashed golden light all over, walked into the room, and the peeping force disappeared. Leo sighed, not sure if he could escape Heimdall's prying eyes. It's a pity that I don't know how to make magic, but I'd like to be invisible like Loki. Single quote. Glanced over, found a figure that suddenly appeared. Leo laughed. The 3 princesses are here. A black formal coat, a tie, and a scarf casually hung around his neck, walking to the unmanned interrogation room. The staff who passed by didn't notice the existence of Loki. After Collison answered the phone and left, he appeared in front of Thor, who had been silent and bowed his head. Rocky, what are you doing here? Thor saw the younger brother in front of him, and finally had some reaction. Rocky said deeply and sadly, I must see you. What happened? Tell me, is it Jotunheim? Thor asked anxiously, let me explain to my father. Father is dead. Thor listened, and did not recover for a long time, and asked in disbelief, what? Loki looked at Thor sadly, your exile, the threat of a new war, he can't bear it anymore. Don't blame yourself, I know you love him, and I want to tell him that, but he just won't listen. Thor couldn't believe that the invincible father in his heart had died, but his trust in Loki made him have to accept this cruel fact. Suddenly, endless grief and self-blame rushed into my heart. It was my own impulse and recklessness that caused my father to be killed. I was arrogant that brought up the war between Jotunheim and Asgard. Mjolnir. Knowing that you can no longer hold a hammer, but putting it where you can reach is really cruel. Thor at this time has lost his arrogance, and this news makes him more and more depressed. The burden of the throne now falls on me. Thor raised his head, his sad eyes with a little expectation, looked at Loki, and asked with a trembling voice. Can I go home? The truce with Jotunheim is based on the conditions of exile. Yes, but can we figure out a way? And my mother forbids you to go back. This sentence again severely gave Thor a knife, making him completely desperate. I'm here to say goodbye, brother, I'm really sorry. Rocky said sincerely. Thor looked at his brother who had stopped him before, and finally a tear fell from the corner of his eyes. No, Thor said sadly, I should say sorry, thank you for being here. Rocky also seemed to have tears in his eyes, and looked at Thor sadly, farewell. When turned his head again, all the grief in Loki's eyes had disappeared. The door suddenly opened, and Collison walked in. But Loki has disappeared. He walked impartially, but a child appeared and blocked his way. Luo basically wanted to go around, but the small figure still stood in front of him. Only then did Loki realize that the child had been staring at him, as if he could be seen. Leo's eyes were glowing with golden light. To Loki, they looked like Heimdall's eyes, and could see through his invisibility illusion. Who are you? Loki's telepathy has failed. He can't perceive this mortal's information. There is a strange energy field on his body, just like a god. Rocky Odinson, do you think you are qualified to pick up Mjolnir now? Rocky looked at Leo and laughed. You dare to speak to me like this, what right do you have to say to me, I am a god? Leo stretched out his hand, and Mjolnir flew directly from the mound to Leo's opened little hand, although it did not seem as easy as Thor's. But no matter what the process is, the result is that Leo holds Thor's hammer in his hand and looks at Loki. Do you dare to pick it up? No, how could you as a mortal pick up Mjolnir? Loki looked at Leo in shock, couldn't believe that the hammer he had dreamed of was held in the hands of mortals other than Thor. Loki grabbed it and squeezed it with great power. Leo released his hand, and Loki couldn't get Mjolnir's recognition at all, and fell straight to the ground, smashing a shallow hole. Unwilling to let go, Loki was also staggered by the heavy hammer. Loki looked at Leo angrily, seeming to have the urge to kill him. Leo waved his hand, and Meow hammer returned to its original position. The dozen or so staff members who saw this scene were all stunned. They didn't expect that the hammer that no one could shake would fly to the hands of the masked boy brought back by Collison. And Leo quickly ran out, taking Loki to the desolate desert a few kilometers away. No one else followed. A metal knife appeared in Loki's hand, and at the same time, his full body suit appeared on him. Tell me, human beings, what do you know, why can you pick up Mjolnir? Leo turned around, looked at the open space and said, Rocky, this trick won't work for me. Broken golden eyes can see through the illusion. Leo can really observe Loki's true location. Sure enough, there was another figure of Loki in front of him, wearing a gold armor and a green cloak, but not wearing a golden antler helmet. Loki looked at Leo. You are not a mortal, nor a person from God's domain, why do you know about Asgard? Dan, the phantom behind Leo quietly stepped forward, and the dagger in his hand directly stabbed up. At the same moment, the phantom in front of Leo had disappeared. Leo turned his head slowly, looking at the startled Rocky. As expected to be called the ***** of pranks, the clone phantom teleport is so proficient in playing, it's usually not used less. Loki looked at the dagger in his hand and looked at Leo who was not injured, and took 2 steps back. Leo removed the golden light from his body, and asked a little curiously, so you are an illusionist? Can you only use a knife to attack besides special weapons? Loki's skill is definitely not weak, he can easily defeat Captain America, and his super physical fitness can't even compete with Leo now. Loki's defense can easily resist ordinary bullets, has super resilience, and the upper limit of power is about 50 tons. For ordinary people, it is also an irresistible god. But now, his phantoms, transformations, telepathy, and hypnosis have no effect on Leo, and there is no one else here who can make him provoke him, and his lips cannot be used. Although I can master various weapons proficiently, I now bring 2 small knives with me, neither the eternal spear nor the artifact of the ice box. And now Leo's defense cannot be broken. I'm not in the mood to play with you anymore, Outlander. Mjolnir will always be Asgard's artifact. If you dare to take it away, no one can save you. Loki stepped back, the rainbow bridge fell down, shrouded it, disappeared leaving only a circular transmission mark. Loki returned to God's domain and looked at Heimdall. Mjolnir was moved by an Outlander, have you seen it? Heimdall wearing gold armor looked at Loki and said, I saw it, but he has a way to hide his figure. Just like you, Odin's seal has not been lifted, and he is not eligible for the power of Thor. Rocky glanced at Heimdall. Send me to Jotunheim. Loki came to the country of the ice giant again. Leo also returned to the research center. It just so happened that Dr. Eric and the others, because of their worries, also came here, and wanted to rescue Thor, and the two also forged Thor's ID card, trying to fake Thor into a PhD in physics who was angry because of the data being stolen. Coulson knew it was fake, but he sent Thor back. The four stood outside, and Jane and Daisy looked at Collison again. Is there a child inside? Leo, who is also a member of our scientific research, see if we can put it together. Collison looked at a few people amusedly. Leo is yours. Thor hasn't recovered from the grief, and Jane and Daisy are also embarrassed. Leo has appeared behind several people. Collison, let's go first. Can the data equipment be returned tomorrow? Yes, but I have to pay back the check for you, and SHIELD's funds are also limited. Collison smiled and said to them. After the five of them left, Collison returned to Meow Hammer. What? You said that the kid just picked up the hammer. Leo, do you really know Coulson? He doesn't seem to be much smarter. In the car, Daisy ate snacks and said, we didn't even see our fake identities. Eric didn't have a good face. Jane, Daisy, Shield is not so easy to fool. You go back first, I have something to talk to them. Sent the two girls back to the house, and then drove them to a bar. Dr. Eric ordered 2 depth charges and placed them in front of him and Thor. Leo looked at the sign posted on the bar. You are not allowed to drink under the age of 22. His mouth bulged and he was angry. But in the lively bar, with the $100 handed over by Leo, a large glass of Depth Bomb was accidentally placed in front of Leo by the bartender. Thor still sat on the bar with grief, and said to himself, you know. I messed up everything, and I did all the wrong things. Dr. Eric glanced at Thor. It's not necessarily a bad thing to know everything, as long as you start asking the right questions. For the first time in my life, I don't know what I should do. You will find your new goal soon. Everyone started like this. Leo said to Thor. Eric turned and looked at Thor. I and Jane's father are colleagues. He was a good man during his lifetime. He never listened to other people's opinions. Thor thought of his father again. Me too. My father wanted to teach me something, but I was too stupid to understand. Eric didn't care about this, and said to Thor seriously. I don't know if you are paranoid or you are scamming or something. I don't care, I only care about Jane. I know the way she looks at you. I swear to you, I didn't intend to hurt her. Thor looked at him in surprise. Very well, in that case, after drinking this glass of wine, then you can leave town tonight. Thor also understood that he had disturbed Jane in their peaceful lives, and recognized the fact that he might not be able to go back, and nodded. The two adults just stared at each other and finished the big glass of Depth Bomb in front of them. Then, Dr. Eric drank and fell on the ground, but Thor was fine. Now only Leo and Thor are left. Leo also finished a large glass of wine, and looked at Thor calmly. Are you going to have a few more glasses? You don't seem to have enjoyed it. This wine tastes good, but it is not strong enough from God's domain. Leo took out another $500, which was considered the remaining wine money. With a cup of wine, the two of them also drank a cup. As the wine drank, Thor's recognition of Leo increased. Leo, do you really know me? Thor Odinson, the owner of Mjolnir, the first fighter of Asgard, you seem to have forgotten your identity. Oddingsson. I killed my father, and I can't pick up Mjolnir. Am I still Thor? Thor, who had drunk more than a dozen glasses of high wine, asked himself in confusion. You just believe that Odin is dead, just rely on what Loki told you in the interrogation room and deceived you countless times. Did you know that Rocky is here? Some Thor who wanted to get drunk also woke up. Yes, I saw him, and I also know that Odin just fell into Odin's sleep and did not die. My father is not dead. Rocky lied to me. Looking at Thor who looked like this, Leo raised his forehead and sighed, yes. Why did he lie to me? The throne should belong to your throne, but now it belongs to Loki. Thor was a little angry, but dropped his head again. I have no way to pick up Mjolnir, I have no supernatural power, and now I am just a mortal. Leo glanced at the bartender who had been staring at the two of them strangely since the beginning, patted Thor, and motioned for him to carry Dr. Eric on his back and prepare to leave. On the way back, Leo said to Thor, "Do you remember what Odin said when he banished you?" These words brought up Thor's memories. Odin tore off his shoulder badge angrily, tore off his cloak, and took back Mjolnir. "You are not worthy of your land. You are not worthy of your title. You are not worthy, those relatives you betrayed." Single quote. Thor murmured. "Then get the recognition of Mjolnir again, rematch your title, and think about yourself whether the previous self is worthy of this throne." Thor sent Dr. Eric back, and then took Jane out by the way. Leo also randomly found a room to rest all night. And Thor and Jane lit a fire outside the RV and chatted all night. After chatting with Jane one night, Thor calmed down for the first time and thought about a lot of truths, as if he had grown a lot overnight. Also introduced Jane about the World Tree and the situation of the 9 worlds. Loki teleported back from Jotunheim, and had agreed with Laufey, the king of frost giants, to assassinate the sleeping Odin. However, Heimdall was suspicious, and Loki used the throne's deterrence to make Heimdall obey him. At the same time, Sif and the 3 samurai felt that they had to meet Thor, even if they violated the rules set by Loki. Several people came to the Rainbow Bridge portal, and Heimdall stood at the door. But Heimdall once promised Loki, "I won't open the Rainbow Bridge to anyone." Heimdall, who has always been very serious, looked at the 4 people in front of him, and said loudly and majestically, "How dare you disobey King Rocky's orders, violate every vow you made as fighters, and would rather bring Thor back after committing treason?" Sif did not hesitate. "Yes. Very good." Heimdall immediately walked in the direction of the hall. "Will you help us?" Sif asked. "I must be loyal to the king, so I cannot open that bridge for you." The 4 of them looked at the back of Heimdall leaving, feeling a little at a loss. Hogun even asked directly, "What should we do?" Sif saw it, and Heimdall seemed to have forgotten the sword of the Rainbow Bridge, which had never left his hand, at the switch. Following the shot of the Rainbow Bridge, Loki had been standing above the Golden Temple and observed this scene. Loki turned angrily and went to the hidden treasure underground palace. Loki, holding the eternal spear, summoned the destroyer. Looking at the huge black ferocious steel armor, Loki gritted his teeth. "Make sure that my brother will never come back, everything is destroyed." At the entrance of the Rainbow Bridge, Heimdall once again held his sword guarding here, looking motionless at Loki who was coming. "Tell me, Loki, how did you let the Jotuns into Asgard?" Heimdall asked first. Loki was a little frustrated. Heimdall violated his ban less than half a day before it was issued. "Do you think there is only one way to get in and out of here, Rainbow Bridge? There are many secret passages, even if you are so talented, you can't know it. But I don't need them anymore, because I am the king. I declare that due to the crime of treason, you are no longer serving as a gatekeeper, and you are no longer a citizen of Asgard." Heimdall looked at Loki holding the eternal gun, "Then I don't need to take orders from you." Heimdall, who had left his identity, waved his sword towards Loki, who had threatened the safety of God's domain. But Loki flipped his hands, and the ice box appeared in his hands, holding it, ejecting a huge stream of frost. Layers of cold frost appeared on Heimdall's body, and the speed of his sword was getting slower and slower. In the end, the tip of the sword stopped in front of Loki's eyes. The frost air continued to gush, locking Heimdall into a huge ice block. With a light movement of his hands, the ice box disappeared between his hands. Juchao Town, everyone just finished breakfast. Thor turned from his depressed mood last night and made coffee for everyone. Eric also learned what happened last night. Although he was still a little unhappy, he didn't say anything. At this time, there was a strong energy fluctuation 15 miles away from Old Bridge Town. On the computer of the research center, an energy simulation image appeared. A vortex cylinder appeared on the computer, and then quickly recovered and disappeared. But the abnormal energy response this time, there was already an alarm, and Collison quickly hurried away with a dozen of his men. In a clearing, under the Rainbow Bridge, Sif and the 3 warriors of the Immortal Palace appeared here. Looking at the faint small town not far away, he hurriedly walked over, and Collison had already drove over here. Leo drank the coffee in his hand, playing with the vibrating reactor with only half of the energy in his hand, watching Jane desperately explaining the 9 realms and the World Tree to Dr. Eric. This is a perfect theory, Jane, but the scientific community will not accept it at all unless there is solid evidence. There was a violent knock on the door. A 2-meter-long armored man, Vostag, knocked on the glass door excitedly, staring at Thor like a child. I found you. The other three also smiled happily in the glass, and found their good partner Thor. Thor looked at them for a while, then laughed happily. The cup in Dr. Eric's hand fell off his hands and looked at the 4 strangely dressed people outside the door in shock. I'm dreaming. Thor went up and embraced the others, very excited, and looked at them happily. Vostad hugged him and walked up to look at the others. Sorry, we are Ms. Sif and the 3 samurai. Eric listened and glanced at Jane and Leo unconsciously. But Jane laughed, as if she had really discovered something extraordinary. Leo frowned, and put the reactor in his hand into his school bag. It seems that the destroyer controlled by Loki is coming soon. Single quote. Thor first introduced Jane and the others. My friends, there is nothing happier than seeing you. But you shouldn't have come. Fandral patted Thor and smiled. We're here to take you home. Thor shook his head. You know that I can't go back. Jotunheim has done war and peace at the cost of banishing me. I can't cause any war anymore. In any case, this is not a good idea. Leo held his forehead helplessly. This guy still believes Loki's words. The shield vehicle also rushed to the place where Sifu and the others landed, looking at the strange circular pattern on the ground. Collison immediately ordered, find someone who studies language signs. But not long after, there was a huge energy fluctuation in the sky once, and a strange vortex cloud appeared in the sky, forming a big tornado-like appearance. The huge energy shook everything around. Even Thor and others, more than 10 miles away, discovered the vision in the distance. The clouds rushed down, blasting a huge wave of air on the ground. After the explanations of Eric and the others by those who came from God's domain. Even Daisy asked strangely, has anyone come down again? Is still the last landing point? The dust slowly descended, and a huge steel figure appeared in it. Is Iron Man doing it again? An agent asked Collison. I don't know, that guy never tells me. Collison picked up the loudspeaker, stepped forward, looked at the giant destroyer, and raised the loudspeaker. Hello, you are using an unauthorized weapon, please state your identity. The destroyer, who was more than 3 meters high, stopped his progress, and the masks on his head began to fold inwards. Collison said to the agent on the side proudly, look at it. It seems that after getting in touch with Iron Man, Collison even became less vigilant about unknown mechas. A large amount of destructive energy surged from the destroyer's chest to converge on his head, turning his head into an energy-emitting port. Seeing that he became such a destroyer, Collison felt something was wrong, and rolled to the side, avoiding the first ray shot by the destroyer. The huge energy shock wave exploded the 2 cars easily. Even people from afar can see the explosion happening here. Several people all ran outside, looking at the landing point where the explosion just happened. Thor first said to Jane. Jane, you must leave here. What are you going to do? I want to stay here. Thor said calmly while watching Jane. Vostag stepped forward and said, Thor will fight with us. Thor was very moved, but he stepped forward and said, guys, now I am immortal. It will only hold you back, but I can help others move to a safe place. Jane stepped forward, if you stay, I will stay too. Daisy raised her hand, everyone. I know there is a bit of a mess, but I still have to say that when I first came out, Leo disappeared. Thor glanced at everyone. Sif, you are ready to fight. Jane, Doctor, you go with me to evacuate the surrounding citizens. Daisy, the task of finding Leo is left to you. Everyone quickly dispersed, leaving Daisy alone on the street. Well, guys, withdraw quickly. Leo, where are you? Fortunately, the purpose of the destroyer is not Collison and others but Thor in the town and others in God's domain. So, after blasting a few shield vehicles, he strode towards Old Bridge Town, ignoring the rest of the people. And Leo passed directly over the head of the destroyer and came to Coulson's side. Of the 9 vehicles, only 3 remained intact. In the case of casualties, a dozen agents were killed by the energy impact of the blow just now. But simply, Collison's luck was good, and it didn't affect him. Several people are cleaning up the mess and reporting the situation to them. Coulson, how are you? Not very good, Leo, a terrifying robot just appeared. Its power is much greater than Tony Stark's armor. Now it has left, it moves fast, and it is probably not far from the town. That is the armor of the King Odin, but let me deal with it next. Leo, who had just landed less than a minute ago, waved his arm, and a dozen of sharp metal thorns with the thickness of his arm were immediately drilled out of the scrapped cars on the side. Leo took the metal thorns with him, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared in front of his eyes, only to see the sonic cloud brought by the metal thorns that appeared in the sky. Collison looked at the gold thread going away, thinking in silence. Is this why Fury trusts him? It looks like Carol, you can only trust, but can't do other things. Drove a few people to chase him. Leo had already come to the top of the destroyer's head. With a wave of his finger, the dozens of metal thorns around him all carried the impact of 5 times the speed of sound. The next moment, he hit the destroyer's body. 12 metal thorns formed by the main shaft of a car carry unparalleled speed and strength. Sprinted towards the huge destroyer steel armor below. The next moment, the sharp tip of the metal thorn hit the destroyer. Then, a huge sonic boom sounded in the air. The dark and tall destroyer was also severely pressed against the ground by this force, and knocked out a giant-shaped pit. The 11 metal thorns in it have all turned into metal cakes, because none of their own materials can withstand this huge force. And also unable to break through the destroyer's defenses, crashed on the impenetrable surface. There was only one metal thorn, part of which was inserted into the destroyer's neck. Leo's eyes lit up, and it seemed that the neck was the destroyer's weakness. With a palm of his hand, the remaining 11 metal cakes flew up. Quickly changed in the air, melting into 3 huge metal thorns. One of the sharp heads quickly flattened and turned into a shovel shape. The destroyer, who was knocked down to the ground, lava-like destructive energy appeared all over his body, and gathered to his face through the transmission node on his neck. The metal thorn inserted into the neck was directly melted away, leaving only the outer half of the remains falling to the ground. A destructive ray of terrifying energy shot towards Leo floating in the air. Leo rushed down, leaning to avoid the terrifying energy. The destroyer swayed his head, trying to shoot directly at Leo, but Leo avoided all of them. And 2 of the huge metal thorns came to the destroyer's back, and shot directly at the joints of the neck. A blow knocked the destroyer into a stagger, and the energy transmission was weakened by a few points. On the other side, a huge force pierced the metal into the destroyer's neck. The huge energy directly melts it, unable to stop the transmission of energy. 3 seconds later, the destroyer's energy has slowly begun to weaken, unable to continue the destruction ray. Leo waved his hands, and one metal thorn rushed up from behind, while the other one quickly turned into a twisted rope made of metal wire. It went forward and wrapped the destroyer's legs and pushed backward. Pull. The entire armor rushed forward, and with the huge metal thorn pressure from the back of his neck, he fell face to the ground again, and another big hole came out. The metal thorn successfully penetrated the destroyer's neck, causing the destroyer, who was about to store energy, to extinguish at once. The already formed huge metal shovel in the sky also turned into a black line and attacked it, preparing to cut off the destroyer's head. The destroyer, who had reached the entrance of the town, was temporarily suppressed by Leo. And the surrounding masses have been evacuated by Jane and them, and only Jane, Dr. Eric, Daisy, and Thor and Sif, the soldiers who have just come out of God's domain, are left. Looking at the destroyer, who was releasing the rays of destruction not far away, Sifu and the 3 warriors of the Immortal Palace unhesitatingly took up their weapons and rushed forward. Sif's hand is a retractable spear made of ulu metal, and Vorstar's hand is a sacred battle axe. Hogun wielded a small chain mace, while Fandral held a small shield and a sword in his hand. Thor did not see Leo, who was manipulating the metal all the way, only saw his best friend rushing towards the destroyer. The body of the destroyer burst out with orange-red energy light again, and his hands were not conforming to the structure of the human body. They were bent and put up together, blocking the metal piece flying to the neck. The whole body structure is being reversed, from back to sky to face. A terrifying energy ray concentrated the wire-twisted ropes on both feet, melting most of them, or even most of them, out of Leo's control and turned into ashes or other substances. Got up and looked for Leo's trace. Even Loki of the destroyer manipulating in the main hall gritted his teeth. That fellow again. Single quote dot. But Loki hasn't forgotten his purpose of sending the destroyer to Earth, it is still Thor. Sif 4 rushed up, after the destroyer ended this destruction beam. Squeezed the short stick in his hand, and two sharp two-edged spears stretched out from both ends, and it plunged into the destroyer's neck once again. This time, the energy transmission was still interrupted, but the weapon was still stuck in the neck, not destroyed by the powerful destructive energy. Leo, who stood tens of meters away, also gave up the attack of ordinary metals, unable to break the defense at all. Both hands grabbed the destroyer, trying to directly control the destroyer's body. The destroyer who was blessed by Odin had a faint color pattern on his body, trying to isolate Leo from the threat of control, but he couldn't do it. However, under the influence of this force, the entire destroyer looked like Leo's eyes were covered with an extremely smooth oil film. Made Leo more difficult to control. Before, the destroyer had already shot Sif out with a palm, and at the same time, a beam of destruction shot out among the three samurai. A violent explosion bombarded all three of them aside. As Leo's control gradually increased, the destroyer's movements became slower and slower. The destruction ray did not stop, and kept insinuating to the surrounding people. Several people who came from God's domain dodged in embarrassment, and even suffered serious damage. Seeing all this in front of him, Thor pulled away and was injured, but still stubbornly wanting to step forward to regain his weapon, Sif knowing that he is now weak and cannot accept any blow from the destroyer. But Thor still strode forward. Looking at the destroyer who gradually stopped, Thor said, "Brother, no matter what I did wrong to you that caused you to do something like this, I'm really sorry." Loki, who had been sitting on the throne, looked at Thor who came forward, but he still had a hesitant look in his eyes that had been determined. At this moment, Thor thought of his friends, whether it was Jane, Leo, or Dr. Eric, who had been helping him. Thor, who had been immersed in the glory of Odin, finally understood why his father would choose peace. Thor, who has never experienced a large-scale war, actually tried to provoke a war between two civilizations. War will surely produce victims, but Thor has never experienced the pain of sacrificing relatives and friends. Now when all his brothers and friends are facing the threat of death, Thor wants to understand how stupid and impulsive he was. Brother, but these people are innocent, killing them will not do you any good. Thor has come to the destroyer, looking at the destroyer who is gradually accumulating energy. So, kill me and end it all. Finally, Thor completely understood Odin's intentions. The king is not just an attacker. Guarding is even more important. In the face of terrifying enemies, Thor is willing to use his body to guard the cherished people. Looking at the destroyer whose energy was dying out, Thor laughed. It seemed that Loki still couldn't bear to hurt him. But as the destroyer turned, a huge slap swung over. Leo walked slowly in front of the destroyer. Looked straight at the huge steel armor in front of him. And the slap shot by the destroyer was enough to slap a car, and it stopped before it touched Thor's face. The metal spikes inlaid on the back of his hand appeared in front of Thor. Thor was scared by Leo's actions, and stepped forward and pulled Leo behind him. Rocky saw this scene, and his eyes also burst into anger. If he didn't shoot Thor, it didn't mean he wouldn't hurt Leo. The destroyer's visor shrank again, and countless destructive energies gathered again, trying to attack Leo. Leo's right palm gently pushed, and the huge metal armor seemed to be hit by a galloping train, flying out several hundred meters away. Still shot a destroying beam in the air. Sif's battle spear flew over under control, and it spun quickly in the air, as if it had become a huge round shield. Deflected that ray a few meters away, causing a violent explosion. Only a few meters away from Thor, the powerful impact still made Thor fly out and fell to the ground. Jane rushed up from behind, hugged Thor, who was a little fainted, and looked at the gray-headed Thor, a little anxious. Thor was in the faint, under the impact of energy, in a blur, as if he felt what Odin was saying to him. Your arrogance and ignorance will bring the fear and destruction of war to innocent people in a peaceful country. Single quote. Going to Jotunheim is just my own pride and vanity at work. All of these are not qualities that a king should have. Looked at Jien's worried eyes for him, and the destroyer walking here quickly. Thor's eyes also instantly became determined, and he stood up again. In the result of thinking that he is already immortal. After experiencing the protection of partners and the consciousness of self-sacrifice. Thor, he faced his own pride and arrogance, and that unnecessary vanity. He wants to have the power to guard everything he loves. And Mjolnir, who was 50 miles away, seemed to have heard the call. The detection device on the side of detected a huge energy fluctuation, and the unshakable Meow hammer began to tremble violently. The seal again appeared on the smooth hammer. Whoever holds this hammer in his hand and deserves it, will have the power of Thor. Single quote. The condensed soil around the hammer began to fall, and the hammer body finally stopped trembling and rose into the sky. Quickly broke through the sound barrier and flew towards Old Bridge Town. Mjolnir made a huge movement in the air, dragging a long white mark behind him and rushing towards this side. Dr. Eric hadn't seen what was flying, but he also noticed the target direction of the thing, looked at Jane next to Thor, and quickly moved forward and pulled Jane back. And Leo looked at the destroyer who rushed here, and the Mjolnir who was flying toward here in the sky. With his hands up, the destroyer who strode to this side also rose to the sky, directly blocking the path of Mjolnir. With a crisp sound, the destroyer was hit by a supersonic hammer, and once again fell out of a big hole on the ground. And Mjolnir was also at the last minute, turned the hammer, the handle backward, and put himself into Thor's hands. In the sky, a huge cloud of thunder and lightning struck down instantly. Shrouded Thor who was standing on the ground. In Leo's eyes, a huge energy followed the lightning into Thor's body, and merged with the small energy ball in his mind. Countless pieces of silver armor suddenly appeared in the thunder and lightning, and began to attach to Thor's whole body piece by piece. And everyone around him saw this scene. A thunder hit Thor directly, and it has not disappeared, and it has been shrouded in Thor. Can vaguely see the figure holding the hammer. Dr. Eric looked at all this blankly, unable to speak. Jane looked at Thor who was flooded with electric light, thinking of everything Thor had said to him, her eyes glowing strangely. Sif and others looked at this familiar picture and laughed happily. The electric light slowly dissipated, as if Thor, who had changed a person, stood out from the electric light. The originally scattered blonde hair, with a lot of gray marks on his face, was wearing a gray woolen sweater. But at this moment, the blonde hair was neatly combed to the back of his head, he was wearing silver scale armor, the shoulder badges on his shoulders were back, and the red cloak behind him was also waving in the wind. But Thor's face did not regain the joy of Thor's power. He understood that this power is not only power, but also a responsibility. Responsibility to guard everyone and the safety of the 9 realms. Thor, the of thunder, is back. Leo stood in front and continued to look at the destroyer, reaching out to control the destroyer and smashing it frantically on the ground. But no matter what, there is no way to harm the destroyer. Even reached out his hand to control Sif's battle spear and slashed at it. Only showed a few deep marks on his body, and he quickly recovered. The angry Leo's eyes shot out a strong golden light, and the brilliant golden light shone on the destroyer. I only saw the illuminated chest, from the original bright black body, began to gradually turn into a grayish silver, and began to spread to the periphery. But it hasn't spread much yet, and a burst of colored light appears, directly purifying the silver back into its original color. But this trick seems to make it feel a great threat. Stood still, resisting the erosion of the golden light. Thor walked up and turned Mjolnir in his hand, like a helicopter wing, to take him up. The dark clouds that hadn't dissipated all around gathered again, and there was endless thunder and lightning. Leo, let me take it apart. Leo was a little angry facing the helpless destroyer, and glanced at Thor in the air. Sent his little school bag aside. Huge golden wings spread out behind him. This is also the first time Leo tried to use Nirvana golden wings to fight. A faint golden layer appeared on Leo's body, and the whole person became lighter. Turned into a golden thread and shot towards the destroyer. After the golden wings approached the destroyer, they made countless golden marks in the air, leaving countless golden afterimages around it. Looked like a brilliant golden sword light, slashing to the destroyer. Even Thor in the air could not see Leo's movements clearly. Leo has already appeared behind the destroyer, finishing the work. Hundreds of golden scars also appeared on the dark destroyer. Every gold mark is embedded in the surface of the armor, although only a shallow layer. But every golden mark has a golden light extending to the surroundings. The gold marks on made the destroyer unable to move, only a strong colored light gushing out, resisting the erosion of the golden light. Jin Wing has been retracted into his body. In the dark clouds above and dusty surroundings. This series of swift movements, except for Thor who was in the sky above, saw a part of it, but the few people not far away saw only a vague golden light. Will not be brought into Leo's body at all. Thor's rotating hammer is getting faster and faster, and the surrounding storm is getting stronger and stronger. Even the car was rolled up within a range of tens of meters in diameter below, and the destroyer, who had been standing still, was slowly rolled up by the wind. Only Leo stood there, motionless. Looking at the little golden man floating upward, the golden light on his body is slowly fading, frowning, and walking towards the few people outside the storm. It's really impossible to solve the destroyer, the metal is not strong enough, and the control force cannot bend Uru. The Golden Wing has just broken the defense, I don't know how effective it is, and it is restrained by magic. Single quote. Seeing that in just 10 seconds, the destroyer completely relieved the rigid state of the golden light. It seems that magic is needed to deal with magic, but I can't do it yet. Single quote. Walked to Sif's side, passed the spear of war in his hand, his eyes glistened slightly, looking at the two figures in the storm. The destroyer relieved his stiffness, looked up at Thor, and a beam of destruction beam shot past. Thor wielded the hammer and directly hit the ray aside. Though Thor didn't dare to try to use his body to carry it hard, but Mjolnir was enough to fly the destruction ray. Thor, who flew hundreds of meters in the air, looked at the destroyer who had just risen, took Mjolnir in his hand, and rushed directly to the destroyer. The destroyer was not polite, a beam of destruction light shot out from his head, facing Thor straight. And Thor used the hammer in his hand and rushed straight forward, using Mjolnir to resist the rays. The beam of destruction couldn't break through the defense of Meow Hammer, so it shot aside. And Thor directly followed the energy rays, directly hitting the hammer into the destroyer's visor. The subsequent energy continues to be released, but the previous energy cannot be discharged, and the touch of two powerful magic equipment directly caused huge energy fluctuations in the air, like the center of the explosion, emitting a strong light, and a huge air wave rushed out in midair. The destroyer crashed instantly, and at the same time Loki felt the signal from Laufey, gave up the destroyer's control, and walked towards the Rainbow Bridge. The still complete body of the destroyer fell from the sky, raising a cloud of dust. The huge tornado quickly dissipated as Thor stopped, and Thor came out of the black dust spotlessly. Leo saw everything in his eyes, looking at the hammer in Thor's hand with some envy. The metal he controls can only be ablated before the destruction rays. If there is a strong weapon, it can also solve the destroyer alone. Thor walked towards Jane and Dr. Eric, who were closest to him. Jane looked at Thor, who was wearing battle armor, tall and mighty, and holding a Meow hammer, and asked, "So, is that what you usually look like?" "Roughly the same. It looks pretty good," Jane said with a bright smile. Thor first glanced at Fandral and them. "We must go to the Rainbow Bridge. I have something to say to my brother." Several people in God's domain also nodded in response. Thor glanced at Leo and walked over. "Leo, you are very powerful. You are not an ordinary mortal. Do you want to go to Asgard with me?" "Forget it. I still have a lot of things to do here. I have a chance." "Okay, but I think I will rush back as soon as possible." Loki seems to have done something in God's domain. Thor said. He wanted to take the other people away, but was stopped by a voice. "Excuse me." Collison ran out of the car, just rushed to him, and stopped the people of Thor. Collison, who had communicated in the interrogation room, looked at Thor and said, "It seems that you still have a lot of things to hide from me." Thor didn't have much dislike for Agent Coulson, but now he somewhat agrees with S.H.I.E.L.D. "Remember, son of Cole, we both fight to protect this world." Thor looked at Collison. "From today, you can regard me as an ally, as long as you return Jane's things to her." Collison nodded and said, "I promised Leo, I can return it to you today, and you can continue to study." Leo came over. "Collison, how are you?" "It's okay, that robot didn't pay attention to us. By the way, what about that robot, what just happened?" Thor ignored Collison, looked at Jane next to him. "Want to see the bridge we have been talking about?" "Of course," Jane said in surprise. Thor grabbed her and turned the hammer in his hand. "Wait, I haven't finished the question yet." Collison hurriedly called. But Thor has already flown out, flying towards the last landing point of the Rainbow Bridge. Several other people in God's domain also hurriedly drove past Dr. Eric. Collison looked at Leo, who had not left. Leo, what happened? Thor recovered, hit the robot, and is now ready to go home. It's as simple as that. The civilians here have been evacuated. No one was injured. The damage to the building was minimal. Leo glanced around at the surrounding buildings. The destroyer was stopped outside the town, basically causing no damage. Apart from a lot of big pits on the road, is it actually okay? Leo carried his little school bag on his back and came to the pit where the destroyer fell. He looked at the steel armor that was 3 meters in size and only had its head deformed. With a single finger, the battle armor rose from the pit, followed Leo, hurried to the Rainbow Bridge, and in a short while, disappeared before everyone's eyes. Bald Sitwell, a senior member of Hydra, came to Coulson's side, looked at Leo leaving behind, and asked curiously. Coulson, who is that person? It's just a friend of mine. Collison looked at the steel robot distressedly and said. Leo didn't rush to the Rainbow Bridge drop point directly, but turned a direction and brought the destroyer to a human goby. Looking at the dark destroyer in front of him, Leo spread his wings behind him. The wings of Nirvana's golden wings were a little twisted, and the edges of the wings rose up and formed a circle. Then quickly turned into a golden saw blade, with the 2 wings resting on the destroyer's waist and cutting. The 2 golden wheels slowly entered the body of the destroyer. The surroundings were still silent. The wings swept across the air without causing any fluctuations, only the edges of the wings were slowly embedding in. With the rendering of golden light, the metal texture in the cutting range seems to have slightly changed, and the efficiency is getting faster and faster. The destroyer has no internal structure. It is Odin's battle armor. Because of the power of magic, it can act autonomously. Now part of the structure has been destroyed by Mjolnir, and Loki is anxious to take Laufey to Asgard, giving up control. In less than 3 minutes, his wings spread out, and the destroyer in front of him has been divided into 2 halves. Reached out and grabbed his upper body and pinched it in his hand. Sat down cross-legged, took out the vibration maker I reactor with half of the energy remaining from his small bag, and held it in his hand. I saw the destroyer armor began to tremble slowly, and after a while, a little golden light appeared on the surface of the armor, converging into a golden bead. Loki inserted the Eternal Gun in his hand into the activation switch of the Rainbow Bridge. Successfully opened the Rainbow Bridge and teleported Laufey, the king of frost giants, to Asgard at the agreed location. Looking at Laufey with only 3 entourages, Rocky said blankly, "Welcome to Asgard." Luo Fei looked at Loki, a little excited and laughed. 2 frost giants were left guarding at the Rainbow Bridge, and then Laufey, who was 2 meters tall, followed Loki and walked towards Odin's sleeping golden palace. These are all clearly seen by Heimdall in the ice. After learning about Loki's plan, Heimdall began to struggle fiercely, not hesitating to lose his original strength to impact the ice on his body. Click. A crack appeared in the ice. Thor took Jane to the landing point of Rainbow Bridge early. Thor looked at the sky. Heimdall, open the Rainbow Bridge. But there was no response. Heimdall. But no matter how he called Heimdall, nothing happened. Thor looked back at Jane and found that something was wrong. Not far away, a car came quickly. The other 4 people from God's domain also came to Thor. Heimdall did not respond. Then we will be gone. Thor looked at the sky. Heimdall, if you can hear us, we need you. Heimdall, we need you. Thor's call came to Heimdall in the ice. Countless divine powers rushed out of his body desperately, and the ice cracks on his body became more and more. Finally reached the limit, and in an instant, all the ice on his body shattered. The sword in his hand turned to the ice giant on the side and cut it away. Another rushed up too, and was stabbed through the stomach by Heimdall with a sword. Killed the 2 guards of Laufey in just 2 moves. Struggling to walk to the transmission platform, insert the sword of the Rainbow Bridge in his hand, and countless Rainbow Bridge energy gathered. But Heimdall fell powerlessly. There was finally some movement in the sky, and a huge tornado storm appeared, in which colorful light beams converged continuously. Sif and the 3 warriors laughed happily. Thor became serious. He had already judged something must have happened to Asgard, and it was no longer suitable to take Jane back. Walked to Jane, I must go back to God's domain, but I promise you that I will come back for you, okay? Jane looked at Thor affectionately. She wanted to go up and have a look, but looked at Thor's serious appearance. Okay. The two embraced and kissed each other. On the desolate Gobi Desert, Leo sat cross-legged. On the half of the destroyer next to him, small golden beads of light emerged continuously and penetrated Leo's body. Most of it is attached to the bones of the whole body, and some of it rushes into my mind and disappears. The original black nails, but under the passing of the golden light, slowly faded away, turned into grayish silver, and the color became more dim. Feeling the power of this metal, Leo's calm face also evoked an arc. Thor and the others returned to Asgard. Looking at Heimdall, who was limp in front of the switch, Sif and Hogun quickly stepped forward and helped him up. And Vostag drew the sword out, cutting off the continued transmission of energy. Thor waved the hammer in his hand. You take him to heal, and I will deal with my brother. Odin's sleeping enemy, countless frost suddenly condensed on the golden door. The mother of the gods, Frigga, saw this scene. As the first magician of God's domain, she taught Loki's magic. Although he is a mage, he's still obliged to draw out the sword beside Odin's bed. The seal on the gate was disintegrated by frost, and followed the frost giant beside Laufey to come forward. Was directly cut to the ground with a sword by Frigga, and could not get up again. But the giant Laufey slapped Frigga out with a slap, and she also fainted, who had 3 times the physical fitness of a human. Laufey stepped forward and looked at Odin, who was lying on the bed, motionless, her face turned a little hideous. I heard that you can still hear and see everything around you. I hope this is true. So you can know that the one who killed you was Laufey. In the huge palm the ice condenses into a sharp ice dagger. Raises his right hand, ready to stick to Odin's neck. Loki, who had been hiding outside the door, finally stood up. The powerful energy in the eternal spear was released and attacked Laufey's back, directly knocking the king of frost giant into the air. The powerful divine power caused the unsuspecting Laufey to suffer a huge trauma, and Loki, who was fully armed, walked forward. Pointed the gun at Laufey on the ground, and looked at Laufey firmly. The one who killed you is the son of Odin. Laufey looked at Loki in disbelief, before he waited for anything to say. The eternal spear once again released a huge light, and it hit Laufey with a powerful blow, directly turning it into a residue. Frigga, who was awakened by the huge energy fluctuation, stood up and looked at Loki excitedly. Loki, you saved him. Frigga's heart was full of pride and praise to Loki, and she stepped forward to hug Loki. Rocky looked at Frigga. I swear to you, mother, they will pay for everything they do today. In the Gobi, the half-destroyer has become extremely dim, and the bright black armor has turned into a dark gray of death. The reactor in his hand also extinguished the last faint light. Leo flipped over his palm, and the destroyer's upper body collapsed and turned into countless inferior metal residues, sprinkled on the ground. The remaining half of destroyer also flew over. With the wings spread out behind Leo, he directly inserted into the body of the destroyer. A faint golden light began to flood into the golden wings. On the destroyer's armor, a faint golden light began to condense into Leo's wings, causing the Nirvana golden wing, which had always been somewhat illusory, to slowly solidify. And lost resistance. The darkness destroys the armor, but it didn't last for 3 minutes. Was soaked up by Nirvana's wings to dry the remaining half of the armor. The faint gray-silver armor also collapsed suddenly and fell into ashes. The illusory wings have also changed a lot, and entities have appeared on countless edges. The ashes of the destroyer dispersed with the wind and disappeared in this desolate Gobi Desert. Control point. 115 feet. Power 22, defense 22, speed 22, spirit 23 inches. Skill. C-level metal control, B-level body, and C-level micro control. Strengthening. GoldenEye 100% copper skin 100% steel bar 100% iron bone 57%. Derivative technique. Destroying golden eyes. Don't be fooled by any abilities, see through all illusions, enhance visual observation, metallize objects. Don't move the golden body, enhance great defense power, stand on the ground with both feet, you will have infinite physical strength, the body will recover faster, and will not be moved by external force. Nirvana golden wings. The highest speed can be blessed to 10 times the speed of sound. The gold wings are condensed into weapons, special skills smiley face. Leo glanced at his attributes. All 4 dimensions reached 22 points, and his control point successfully rose to 115 points. Also increases the strength of iron bone by 57%. Both eyes directly saw Jane and Dr. Eric in the distance, shook his body slightly, and flew over there. In less than 10 seconds, Leo came to the 3 of them, but the big guys seemed to be looking at the sky. No one noticed Leo's arrival. Leo walked over. Doctor, what's the matter? Thor and his partner went back. Something seems to have happened, and I think I have to take a good rest when I go back. I have been a little confused recently. Leo looked at the circular pattern teleportation array on the ground and licked his lips. The full power of the Rainbow Bridge can destroy a planet. Although the Earth is at the root of the world tree, Odin absolutely cannot tolerate the destruction of the Earth, but he is so powerless. In the sky, a rotating cloud layer suddenly appeared, but this time it was not a teleportation, but the light of extinction opened by Loki. In the sky above the heads of a few people, the clouds were very dim, and horrible sounds came out of them, and there were flashes of illusory colorful light. Seeing this unusual movement, Dr. Eric also felt something was wrong. Jane wanted to ask if Jane knew anything, but Jane also looked confused. Leo opened his eyes, but there was nothingness penetrating the past. Looking at the huge movement, Leo felt a huge sense of powerlessness, and also felt his own weakness. Stretched out his hands and shook it imaginarily. Go to Wakanda and see. Single quote. In the Golden Palace, Thor walked in. Frigga saw Thor, who had returned from the earth, and went up to hug him excitedly. Thor, I know you will be back. Thor looked at Loki holding the eternal spear all the way, and Loki was a little flustered. You're a liar genius, brother, always always. Thor walked towards Loki with the Meow hammer in his hand. Rocky held the gun in his hand and looked at Thor. It's great that you can come back. But excuse me for my unaccompaniment. I'm going to destroy Jotunheim. Loki gritted his teeth and raised the tip of the gun in his hand, aimed at Thor, and shot out a strong energy. The simple energy-generating cannon blasted Thor out of the Golden Temple and fell from a high altitude. At this moment, no one noticed that Odin, who had been lying still on the bed, moved the muscles in the corners of his eyes slightly. He can perceive the movement of the outside world, and is working hard to end Odin's sleep. Loki ignored his shocked mother and ran towards the Rainbow Bridge on horseback. It wasn't until Loki inserted the Eternal Spear into the activation port that Thor regained consciousness and flew toward the entrance with his hammer. Drew out the Eternal Spear, placed the ice box on the top, freezing all the forces that disperse the Rainbow Bridge, and continuously strengthening it through the ice box. The energy of the Rainbow Bridge keeps increasing, and the Rainbow Bridge arriving at Jotunheim has begun to destroy the frosty planet. Numerous explosions occurred around the Rainbow Bridge, collapsed, and the ground broke apart. Countless frost giants under this extinction power, like countless little ants, can only flee farther, if the energy of the Rainbow Bridge continues. Before long, it may pass directly through Jotunheim, and the entire planet will be destroyed. Loki looked at the flying Thor, and said proudly, you can't stop it, the Rainbow Bridge will end Jotunheim in 2. Thor stepped forward and waved the hammer, slamming the icicle fiercely. But the gun in Loki's hand was another shot that blasted Thor out. Thor stood up and looked at his brother with a hint of anger with some incomprehension. Why are you doing this? In order to prove to my father, I am worthy of being his son. When he wakes up, he will find that I saved his life and destroyed the monster's race. Loki stared at Thor fiercely. I will be the heir to the throne. You cannot destroy a race. Thor looked at Loki and said anxiously. Why? Huh? Loki suddenly smiled exaggeratedly, and walked slowly towards Thor. I have changed. Me too. Rocky shot Thor in the face. Come and fight me. Said. Another shot which knocked Thor out. Rocky shouted loudly. I never wanted a throne. I just want to be treated equally with you. Thor looked at Loki, who was walking towards him, and said loudly. I won't fight you, brother. Loki, wearing a golden antler helmet, looked at Thor, but there was a trace of determination in his eyes. I am not your brother, I never have been. Rocky, you are crazy. Rocky got excited when he heard these words, and asked in a trembling voice, are you crazy? Is it? Really? Loki's body trembled a bit, and there was a painful ferociousness in the corner of his mouth. The unfair treatment from childhood to large seems to have exploded at this moment, looking at my brother who has accompanied me for thousands of years. For more than 1,000 years, Loki didn't know that he was adopted, but the father of the gods always preferred Thor. Loki comforted himself. I want to be strong. Thor has a father and I have a mother. But Thor is like the sun, wherever he goes, everyone can only see Thor, not Loki in the shadow. Everyone likes Thor more, thinking that Thor is the heir appointed by God's domain, and Loki is the little prince who is not taken seriously. Why? I am also a prince. Although my brother is strong, I am smart. Loki, who is thoughtful, always notices that Thor hasn't noticed, but he also has paranoia in his heart, such as, I only care about what I care about, and I don't care about others. Looking at Thor treating himself like this, Rocky asked with tears in his eyes. Come on, what happened on Earth that made you so weak? Don't tell me it's that woman. But Thor heard this but didn't refute, looking at Loki silently. It turned out to be true. Loki looked at Thor clearly, a teardrop slipped, and shouted loudly, well, after this is over, maybe I will visit her myself. Thor heard Rocky's threatening words and threw the hammer without hesitation. Loki also raised the eternal spear in his hand and pushed it up. No surprise, Thor threw Loki to the ground. The brothers got into a fight. No one is dead, you throw me over, I throw you over. A Thor and an archmage fought hand to hand like this, the collision between the weapons, the two mages were fighting bayonet-like warriors. In the end, Thor waved the Mjolnir in his hand, using the powerful kinetic energy to give Loki along with himself, and knocked out the Rainbow Bridge launcher that started the rotation. Crashed into the colorful bridge surface of the energy transmission pipeline of the Rainbow Bridge together. Loki was hit by the bridge, and his whole body fell, leaving only one hand hanging on the edge. Thor also got up from the side, came to the edge of the bridge and looked at Loki below. Loki opened his big shiny eyes, brother, please. Thor gave a helpless look, then squatted down, ready to lift Loki up. Just when his left hand touched Loki, Loki on the edge of the bridge turned into a phantom light and disappeared. Rocky laughed suddenly behind Thor. Stabbed up with a single shot, using the eternal spear as an electric baton. It was obvious that Thor could fly into the abyss with one shot, but he only thrust Thor into the ground. At the same time, dozens of Loki's phantoms appeared continuously around him, occupying the surrounding area around Thor. Loki laughed presumptuously, and all thrust his guns towards Thor. Thor held up Mjolnir in his hand and released a huge electric light. A range attack knocked out all the surrounding Loki. One of Loki's body also flew out and fell on the bridge in front. Thor stood up and walked to the fallen Rocky. Directly put the Mjolnir in his hand firmly on Loki's chest. Finally, I turned around and looked at the Rainbow Bridge, which was still spinning fast and still not stopping, and approached there a few steps. The huge speed even directly drove Thor, who was standing on the transmission bridge, slowly pulling him towards the entrance. The release device of the Rainbow Bridge was damaged by two people from the outside, and the first time it was so overloaded, it had a slight tendency to collapse. But the Rainbow Bridge is still continuously accumulating energy, and the danger in Jotunheim is also increasing. Loki, who is under the hammer, shouted loudly, look at you, the almighty Thor. Even if you are powerful, what use is it now? Rocky seemed to have succeeded in a strategy, and as if he had ended his inner suffering, he lifted his head back vigorously, and said with all his strength, did you hear? Brother, you can't do anything. Thor reached out and grabbed it, and the hammer on Loki's chest flew into his hand. Looking at the Rainbow Bridge, which was still accumulating energy in front of him, Thor bit his teeth and smashed the energy transmission belt of the Rainbow Bridge under his feet. A crack appeared on the slightly transparent transmission board in an instant. Odin, who was sleeping on the bed, also opened his eyes at this time. Thor didn't stop his movements, and slammed into the ground with one hammer and one hammer. After a few hammers, a crack appeared. Rocky did not dare to believe that he would do such a thing. Looking at Thor who was still hammering the ground, he said anxiously, what are you doing? If you destroy this bridge, you will never see her again. This was Loki's first thought. He knew that his brother liked that human girl, and he was afraid that his brother would be sad. There has been an obvious partition on the transmission belt and energy has overflowed. This is the huge energy transmitted by Asgard. Looked at the huge pit in front of him. Forgive me, Jane. Thor hit the final hammer. The interruption of energy caused a huge explosion in the damaged area, and both of them were blown off. But it finally stopped the Rainbow Bridge from continuing, and the device that turned on the Rainbow Bridge also lost its support point because of the violent explosion behind it. The whole device broke apart and slowly fell towards the endless void on the edge of Asgard. Loki was swept down by the gust of wind on the edge, and Thor jumped down without hesitation. Grabbed the eternal spear in Loki's hand, and both of them broke away from the support of Asgard. When they all fell, one hand grabbed Thor's red cloak. Odin ended his Odin's sleep, rushed over and saved the two. Loki looked at Odin above, and said aggrievedly, I could have done it, father. What could have been done was for you. For all of us. Odin looked at Loki, no, Loki. Rocky watched Odin negate everything he had done without emotion, just like before, just silently watching him. And this indifferent expression made his heart full of grievances, and Loki, with tears in his eyes, was completely cold. The arm that held the gun tightly also loosened a little. Loki, don't. Thor realized Loki's intentions and shouted. Loki completely let go of his right hand, and fell into the void below, and the node that was bombarded by the Rainbow Bridge completely disappeared. The four people on the Gobi Desert looked at the gradually clearing weather in the sky, as if nothing had happened. Daisy looked at the white clouds in the sky, disappeared. Glanced at Jane who was still in a daze, turned and walked towards the car. Dr. Eric glanced at Jane, sighed, and walked over. Jane lowered her head in disappointment. Thor did not return. He stayed in God's domain and didn't know any news. Leo still stared at the sky blankly. The energy of the Rainbow Bridge disappeared completely, and there was no trace of it anymore. The car drove to Leo's side. Daisy looked at him. Leo, let's go back. Leo looked back at them. You go first, I have something to go out. Collison will return all your data equipment to you. Leo's mind at this time is also a bit complicated, thinking about the scene that appeared in the sky just now, and also feeling his own weakness. Looking at the circular transmission pattern on the ground, he stretched out his hand and waved. All the metal dust on the ground poured up, destroying it completely. I still have more than a year, and I also need to speed up. Single quote. In the car, Daisy looked at Jane who was sitting in a daze. Jane, what are you going to do next? I think we already have a guess about the secret of Rosenbridge. Go back, I want to record this energy frequency fluctuation, I want to find his figure. Leo rose up into the sky, came to the high altitude, looked at the map on the phone, and prepared to fly to Africa. Collison, Thor has gone home, and there is no chance to come again for the time being. Do you have any new plans? Collison wore headphones and walked to an empty room. Looked at the Hammer Research Center being dismantled below. I have to go back first. It seems that I have found something extraordinary in the Antarctic. I think I need to take a look. You will be very happy this time, Agent Coulson. Leo hung up and flew towards Wakanda with all his strength. Among the clouds, Leo was moving fast at a speed of Mach 3. Leo has come to the sky above the African continent, opened his golden eyes, and examined the forest below. On the small phone in his hand, it is shown that Wakanda's location is here. But Wakanda, who was enveloped by the defensive enchantment, was not so conspicuous. Passing by, the golden light in Leo's eyes became more intense. I saw a huge mountain range disappear out of thin air, and a science fiction city with tall buildings appeared inside, but it was surrounded by mountains and rivers. The phantom of the mountains outside is extremely real. When Leo turned off his golden eyes and looked at the phantom under him, he couldn't tell the truth from the fake, and even saw the small animals in the mountains. But all this is illusory, Wakanda's defensive enchantment. In order to protect the existence of Shenzhen and prevent the outside world from knowing, the high-level enchantment designed by the power of the country. Only after getting the certification can you enter smoothly, otherwise, the powerful energy will burn you into coke. Leo came directly to the sky above the defensive enchantment, the virtual protective layer that had been breached. In other words, Leo is still outside the defensive layer, but the inner city of Wakanda can already be seen. Above the empty sky, there is an invisible energy shield with powerful searing energy. and can resist strong and large-scale impact, just like a non-Newtonian liquid. If Leo crashed into it at super high speed, it might not be easy to eat. Leo was unwilling to try. The tiny Leo floats outside the protective cover, no one notices it. In the backpack, the scrapped reactor flew out, and the outer metal was turned into a metal blade, which was inserted directly into the protective cover. Even though it is a very high-quality metal material, it has become fragile after being burned by the protective cover, but it was cut off as soon as it entered 3 centimeters. The cross-section is smooth and tidy, with burn marks. Among the tallest buildings in the center of Wakanda, a tiny red dot appeared on one side of the protective cover in a huge projection. But there was no alarm sound. Although the guards on the side also observed this scene, they were a little puzzled. What's the situation? Is there a loophole in the repellent device that allowed some birds to break in? Don't worry about it. If there is a problem, I will alert myself. Another armed guard said. As soon as the voice fell, an alarm red appeared in the entire room, and the warning sounded. At the same time, on the virtual projection, the larger red dot was also magnified. The 2 black guards looked at each other and ran out quickly. A golden light appeared on Leo's arm, and he resolutely stretched towards the defensive cover. The blue energy laser cover aroused a lot of waves, and the laser energy covering the edge of the arm became more intense, visible to the naked eye. All the energy blasted on Leo's tiny arms and merged into the golden light. But Leo only felt a trace of scorching heat, as if there was no harm. The body shook slightly, the golden light instantly enveloped the whole body, and the whole person slowly dived into the defensive cover. A warm energy touched Leo's whole body slightly, and even made Leo feel a little comfortable. The whole person was placed in the middle part of the defensive cover, and the energy cover turned into a curtain to cover himself. Like immersing in a hot spring, the bursting damage energy is filtered by the golden light of the body surface, and it enters Leo's body warmly, turning into a burst of energy and flooding into his mind, replenishing the missing energy. Fighters have already been raised in several places in Wakanda. The current King T'Chaka and the new Black Panther T'Challa and others have all arrived in the hall. Gathered together, looking at the projection of the defensive cover in the middle of the hall seriously. Everyone stared at the small red dot above, indicating that there was always foreign matter in it, blocking the flow of energy. King T'Chaka watched this scene seriously. He knew that his own defensive shield was strong, unless it was a battle armor made of vibrating gold, otherwise there were not many things in the world that could withstand the impact of such high energy. 10-year-old Su Rui also hid behind the king and watched all this, curiously looking at the little red dot above. Knock on the tablet computer in hand, and constantly calculate the energy level strength that the unknown object bears. Looking at Leo again, he stayed in the defensive cover full of golden light, and the energy layer that was enough to cut off the steel turned into a gentle energy and was absorbed into the body. Although the amount is not as large as that of the reactor directly absorbed, the cost is strong endurance. Leo didn't stay for too long either. He pushed his body forward slightly, and he entered the center of Wakanda, the central city. Has not yet flown out 20 meters, 7 or 8 disc-shaped planes full of technological sense have quickly rushed from a distance and stopped in front of Leo. Several gun muzzles under the fuselage were lifted and aimed at Leo in the air. And in the hall also directly projected Leo's real-time image. Leo floated in the air with a golden light, looking at everyone in front of him fearlessly. Su Rui's eyes glowed with curiosity. She did not expect that the guy who broke in was a boy about the same size as herself. Black Panther T'Challa looked at the figure in the sky with a serious face. A year ago, he ate the heart-shaped grass, which greatly improved his strength, speed and response, and became a new generation of panthers. And T'Challa, who had increased in confidence, faced the child in the sky at this moment, but there was a sense of fear. The moment Leo entered Wakanda, he immediately felt the huge vibrating meteorite beneath the ground. Reached out his hand and grabbed it lightly, and this vibrating meteorite that had been buried in the ground for thousands of years began to tremble slightly. Even the whole city with Wakanda began to tremble. But the next moment, Leo stopped his movements and looked at the countless crowds running around in a panic, with a hint of apology in his heart. My name is Liu Chong, come to see King Wakanda. Everyone in the hall also felt the source of the unusual shock just now. The projection in front of also changed quickly. It turned out that the vibrating meteorite they relied on had an abnormal vibration. Tekara stood up. Father, this stranger came to Wakanda, but suddenly there was such an unprecedented situation. Maybe it is related to the stranger. We need to find out the truth. In the projection, Leo's words also spread from everyone. King T'Chaka was silent for a while, and said, "Bring him here. We must understand the truth. Wakanda's secrets are not allowed to be leaked." Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel.